Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep into the brutal, often terrifying world of medieval crime and punishment. Imagine for a moment that you're not in your comfortable bed, but huddled in a damp, cold hut. The smell of wood smoke and wet earth thicken the air. The concept of justice is about to become intensely personal, and frankly, you probably won't survive this. It's a world where a simple mistake, a moment of desperation, could unravel your entire existence in the most public and painful way imaginable. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. As always, I love seeing where you're all tuning in from, so drop your city or country and the local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice is the cold. It's not a dramatic biting wind, but a persistent seeping dampness that lives in your bones. It radiates from the packed earth floor of your small hut. It clings to the rough, undyed wool of your tunic, and it seems to fall from the very air itself, thick with the haze of 100 meagre cooking fires. Your world is a small village, a cluster of wattle and daub homes clinging to the side of a muddy track. In the distance, on a low hill, stands the stone manor of the local lord, a constant silent reminder of the vast gulf between his world and yours. A little closer is the church, its small stone spire the only thing that truly seems permanent in this fleeting landscape. Your life is governed by the sun and the seasons. You wake before dawn, the sky a pale, washed-out grey, and you work until the light fails. Your hands are a testament to this life, calloused, cracked, the nails permanently rimmed with the dirt of the fields you work but do not own. You are a villain, bound to this land, part of the property as much as the trees and the river. Your labour belongs to the Lord, your obedience belongs to the reeve who manages his affairs, and your soul, you are told, belongs to God. But your hunger, that belongs only to you, and the hunger is constant. It's a dull ache in your belly that sharpens into a painful knot by the end of the day. Your diet is a monotonous rhythm of pottage, a thin, watery stew that bubbles away in a single pot over your central fire. Into it goes whatever you can find. Rough grains like barley and oats, a few leathery beans, perhaps a wilted cabbage or turnip from your small garden plot. It's the original perpetual stew. You just keep adding water and whatever scraps you have, hoping it never runs out. It's a far cry from the artisanal bone broth trends of today. This is pure, unadulterated survival, and it tastes like boiled dirt and disappointment. The memories of real famine are never far away. Your parents still speak in hushed tones of the Great Famine, a few generations back when the rains fell for years without end, crops rotted in the fields, and the sun seemed to vanish from the sky. They talk of villages that simply disappeared, of neighbours who sold their children for a handful of grain, of a desperation so profound it scraped away the thin veneer of community and left only gnawing animal survival. Those stories are the ghosts that haunt your every waking moment, a reminder of how close to the edge you always are. One failed harvest, one sick ox, one dry summer, and the ghost of starvation could become a guest at your table. Historians still argue whether the average peasant's diet was truly as bleak as the official records suggest, or if foraging for nuts, berries and wild herbs, along with trapping the occasional small animal, illegally, of course, provided more variety and nutrition than we give them credit for. But as you look at the faces of your children, their cheeks hollowed and their eyes too large, you know that whatever can be gleaned from the woods is not enough. It's never enough. The forest belongs to the Lord, and poaching his deer is a crime punishable by death. Even taking a rabbit can cost you a hand. The law, it seems, is a luxury designed for the well-fed. Tonight the ache in your stomach is particularly sharp. The pottage pot is empty. The last of the dried beans are gone. You can hear the faint whimpering cries of your youngest child, a sound that twists something deep inside you. Through the single, unglazed window of your hut, you can see the warm yellow glow of the baker's house. He is a man of some standing in the village, a freeman who owns his own oven. The smell is what reaches you first. Rich, warm, intoxicating. It's the smell of fresh bread, a luxury you haven't tasted in months. And as you watch him through the dimming light, you see him stack the loaves to cool near an open window. They are plump, golden brown and impossibly close. The thought enters your mind unbidden. a dangerous spark in the cold darkness of your despair. It's a foolish, reckless idea, but the crying of your child is getting louder, and the smell of the bread is pulling you, promising a moment of relief in a lifetime of want. The line between an honest, starving man and a criminal is thinner than you ever imagined. It's as thin as a pane of glass that isn't there. That single, desperate thought of stealing the bread terrifies you not just because of the baker, but because of the vast, intricate web of rules you live within. You realise standing there in the cold that the concept of crime in your world is a far more sprawling and insidious thing than simple theft. It's a tangled net of obligations, prohibitions, and expectations, and it feels as though it was designed specifically to catch people like you. The law isn't just about protecting the powerful, it's about controlling the powerless, ensuring every cog in the great machine of this kingdom stays in its designated place. Taking that loaf is a felony, a capital offence that could see you hanged, but you could just as easily find yourself in trouble for things that seem, to a modern mind, utterly trivial. For instance, the day itself is a factor. If this were a Sunday, the holy day of rest, your very act of working in the field earlier would have been a crime against God, punishable in the church courts. The church's reach is long, and its laws run parallel to the king's. You're expected to attend Mass, to keep the Sabbath holy, and to avoid any form of labour. Historians have found countless records of ecclesiastical courts fining people for mending a fence or even chasing a stray animal on a Sunday. It was a serious offence, a tear in the sacred fabric of time itself. Then there are the crimes against your neighbours, which are policed with a startling intensity. Did you let one of your chickens wander into the next-door garden plot and peck at their precious seedlings? That's a trespass, and you'll answer for it in the manor court. Did you get into a heated argument with the woman at the well? Your voice is rising, your accusations sharp and public. If your words were deemed too slanderous or disruptive, you could be accused of being a scold. This was the medieval equivalent of a vicious social media pile-on, except instead of getting ratioed, you could end up in a public humiliation device. Even gossiping, the quiet sharing of secrets that oils the gears of village life, could land you in hot water if the wrong person overheard. Your very silence can be a crime. This is a quirky but fundamental tenet of medieval law. If you were to witness a crime, say, someone else stealing that bread from the baker, you are legally bound to raise the hue and cry. This is not a suggestion, it's a duty. You must immediately start shouting, raising the alarm at the top of your lungs, and every able-bodied man within earshot is then obligated by law to drop whatever they're doing, milking a cow, sharpening a scythe, drinking in the tavern, and join the chase. Failing to raise the cry, or failing to join it, is a crime in itself. It was the original neighbourhood watch, but with pitchforks and serious legal consequences for not participating. There is no such thing as minding your own business. Your neighbour's business is your business, and the community's peace is your direct responsibility. This intricate system of control extends to commerce too. The woman who brews ale for the village, the ale wife, is a vital part of the local economy. But if her brew is found to be weak, sour, or improperly made, she can be fined or punished by the ale conner, a sort of medieval beer inspector appointed by the manor court. Selling bad ale wasn't just poor business, it was seen as a deception against the community. It was a betrayal of trust, like a modern tech company deliberately slowing down your phone. Historians still argue whether the endless lists of minor fines recorded in manor court documents represent a truly oppressive, micromanaged society, or if they were a more flexible tool, invoked only when neighbourly disputes boiled over and could no longer be resolved with a quiet word or a grudging apology. Were people constantly being dragged to court for a stray pig, or were these formal records just the last resort for the most stubborn of arguments? The truth is likely somewhere in between. For every fine officially recorded, a dozen other disputes were probably settled with a handshake, a shared drink, or a shouting match that never reached the reeve's ears. But as you stand there, the smell of the bread a sweet torture. You're not thinking of stray pigs or weak ale. You're thinking of felony. You're thinking of the chasm between a petty offence which might earn you a small fine of a few pence and a serious crime, which could cost you your property, your limbs, or your life. The line is brutally clear. Stealing anything worth more than a shilling, and that plump loaf is dangerously close to that value, is grand larceny. It is a crime that puts you outside the king's peace, a crime that means the full weight of the law, not just the manor court's gentle slap on the wrist, will come down upon you. You know all of this. It's knowledge absorbed from childhood, from hushed warnings and public examples. Yet the gnawing in your gut and the image of your family's hungry faces are a more immediate, more powerful force than the abstract terror of the law. The world is full of invisible lines waiting to be crossed, 1,000 tiny rules designed to keep you in your place. But tonight, only one line seems to matter, the one between your hiding spot in the shadows and the baker's cooling rack. The law feels distant, but the hunger is right here, a physical presence inside you, demanding to be fed. The debate inside your head is a frantic, whispered argument. Every sensible part of you, every lesson learned from the priest's sermons and the reeve's stern warnings, screams that this is madness. It's a fool's bargain, trading a moment of relief from hunger for an eternity of fear or a swift, brutal end. But the cries from your hut are a more potent sermon. Hunger is a god too, and it demands its own sacrifices. The rational part of your brain, the part that understands consequences, is being shouted down by the primal, desperate instinct to provide, to survive, to make the crying stop. The decision is made not with a thought, but with a deep, shuddering breath. You are going to do it. You detach yourself from the deeper shadows of a neighbouring hovel and begin to move. Each step is a calculation. The ground is a treacherous mix of mud and filth, and the sucking sound your worn leather shoes make seems as loud as a thunderclap in the oppressive quiet. The village is asleep, or should be. Hours ago, the curfew bell would have rung from the church tower, a signal for all good folk to be indoors, to bank their fires and bar their doors. To be out now, night walking, is a crime in itself. The law assumes that anyone creeping about after dark is up to no good, and it treats them more harshly. If you are caught, the very fact that it is night will be counted against you. The darkness is your cover, but it is also your accomplice, and it will betray you in court. You move with a hunter's caution, your senses screamingly alive. You can smell the lingering scent of damp wool, pig manure, and the faint, sweet smell of rotting thatch. You can feel the cold air on your face and the frantic, rabbit-like thumping of your own heart. There are no streetlights here, no friendly glow from a neighbour's window. The world is painted in shades of charcoal and ink, the pale moonlight offering just enough light to make out shapes, but not enough to be certain of what they are. Every twisted tree stump looks like a waiting man. Every rustle in the thatch could be a guard. It's the original stealth video game, but if you get caught, you don't just restart at the last checkpoint. You reach the baker's wall, is rough under your fingertips, a lattice of wattle sticks packed with a mixture of clay, dung, and straw. You press your ear against it, listening. You hear the slow, rhythmic breathing of sleep from within. The baker and his family are lost to the world. You inch your way towards the window. It's little more than a square hole in the wall covered by a wooden shutter that is, by some miracle of carelessness, propped open just a few inches to let the steam from the cooling loaves escape. Medieval security systems were, shall we say, a little trusting. It's an invitation, a trap. Your head is a whirlwind of frantic prayer. Please don't let a dog bark. Please don't let a baby cry. Please don't let the baker have a sudden urge to check on his precious bread. You take another deep breath, the air tasting of yeast and fear, and you reach. Your arm, thin and wiry from a lifetime of labour, snakes through the opening. The warmth from the loaves washes over your skin. It's a shock after the cold night air. Your fingers touch the crust of the nearest one. It's hard, rough, and wonderfully real. This isn't the soft, airy bread of the future. This is a dense, heavy loaf, packed with rye and barley flour, the kind of bread that could double as a defensive weapon in a pinch. Its weight is substantial. Your fingers close around it. For a heartbeat, you freeze. This is it, the moment of transformation. A second ago, you were a poor but honest man. Now, as your hand gently draws the loaf back through the opening, you are a thief, a felon. The bread is now in the cold night air with you. It's yours, and its value is terrifying. You know the price of things. A single penny can buy a couple of eggs or a cheap gallon of ale. A skilled labourer might earn 2 or 3 pence for a full day's work. This loaf, this beautiful, life-saving loaf, is worth at least a penny, maybe more. Stealing anything over the value of 12 pence, a shilling, was grand larceny, a crime that automatically meant death. This isn't that, but it's still a felony, a serious life-altering crime. Historians debate the mindset of the petty criminal in your era. Was it always pure, gut-wrenching desperation, as it is for you tonight? Or was there sometimes an element of what they call social crime? A small act of rebellion against a system that felt fundamentally unjust? A belief that the lord who had so much and the peasant who had so little were not equal in God's eyes, and that taking a pittance from the haves was a form of rebalancing the scales. Right now, you don't feel like a social rebel. You just feel the frantic electric terror of a thief. You have it. You're holding it. You pull your arm back, scraping your knuckles on the rough wood of the shutter. You don't even feel the pain. You clutch the loaf to your chest like a sacred relic, its warmth seeping through your thin tunic, a stark contrast to the ice in your veins. You back away from the house, slowly, carefully, melting back into the shadows. One step, then another. Your eyes are locked on the window, waiting for a light to appear, for a shout to shatter the silence. But there is nothing. Only the gentle sigh of the wind and the distant hoot of an owl. You've done it. You've actually done it. A wave of relief, so powerful it almost makes your knees buckle, washes over you. You turn and hurry, not quite running, back towards the cold comfort of your own home, the prize held tight against your thundering heart. For one beautiful, fragile moment, you believe you've gotten away with it. You make it back to your hut, slipping through the hide flap that serves as your door. The darkness inside is absolute, but it's a familiar darkness. You can hear the soft, sleeping breaths of your family. The air is stale and close. You place the loaf of bread on the small, rough-hewn table, the thud shockingly loud in the silence. For a glorious, fleeting second, there is only the profound relief and the warm, yeasty smell filling your home. You are a hero. You have brought food. You have vanquished the enemy of hunger. But this feeling of triumph dissolves into pure, cold dread with the sound of a single, sharp bark from a distant dog. Then comes the shout. It's not the baker's voice, but his wife's, high and shrill, piercing the night. "Thief! Thief! Out! Out!" The words are ancient, a formulaic cry of alarm that every person in the village knows instinctively. It's the human fire alarm, the trigger for a legal mechanism that is about to spring into action with terrifying speed. Another voice joins in, the baker's this time, a deep-chested roar of rage and violation. "Thief! Raise the cry!" And the village responds. It starts as a ripple. A door is thrown open with a crash. A confused shout from another hut, then another. It spreads like a virus. Lights flicker to life. The dim, greasy flames of tallow candles or rushlights. The quiet, sleeping village is transformed in seconds into a waking, angry beast. This is the hue and cry. A cornerstone of English law, formalised in the Statute of Winchester just a few decades ago, it makes law enforcement the mandatory, collective duty of everyone. There are no professional police officers to call. Your neighbours are the police, and they're all clocking in for duty right now. Very, very angry. It's a bit like a homeowners association meeting, but with more shouting and a much higher chance of getting bludgeoned. You freeze, your hand still on the stolen loaf. Your heart, which had just begun to slow, is now a wild drum against your ribs. You grab the bread, you're not leaving it now, and peer through a crack in the wattle wall. It's a scene of organised chaos. Men are stumbling from their homes, pulling on tunics, grabbing whatever comes to hand. There's no time to find a proper weapon. One man has a wood axe, another a heavy drover's staff. Most just have pitchforks or scythes or simple, sturdy clubs. Their faces, illuminated by the flickering, dancing lights of the torches they're lighting, are grim. They are your neighbours. That's John the Thatcher over there, a man you shared ale with just last week. And there's William, whose son plays with yours in the dirt. Tonight, they are not your friends. They are a posse, a mob, and you are their quarry. Their motivation isn't just about restoring the baker's property. They're driven by law and self-interest. If a felon commits a crime and escapes, the entire community can be held responsible. A royal justice, on his next circuit, could impose a heavy fine on the whole village for letting you get away. So your escape cost them all cold, hard cash. Suddenly, their enthusiasm for the chase makes a lot more sense. They aren't just hunting you, they're protecting their own wallets. The shouting coalesces into a single, terrifying baying sound. A tertium et clamo, the priest might call it in Latin. To you it's just a wall of noise that seems to be coming from everywhere at once. You have to run. Now you burst out of your hut, away from the direction of the baker's house, and plunge into the darkness between the hovels. The ground is uneven, and you stumble, the heavy loaf clutched under your arm like the world's most dangerous football. You're not exactly wearing high-performance running gear. Your loose tunic catches on a stray branch, and your simple leather shoes offer no support and even less traction in the mud. Historians still question the actual success rate of the hue and cry. In the scattered and incomplete records of the time, it's hard to tell if this chaotic scramble was an effective way of catching criminals or more of a ritualized performance of community anger. Did more people escape than were caught? Probably. But as you hear the heavy thudding footsteps and the angry shouts getting closer, the statistical success rate feels terrifyingly high. You risk a glance over your shoulder. The mob is a monster with a dozen heads, a terrifying creature of bobbing lights and waving farm implements, and it's lumbering right for you. They've seen you. The general roar now has a focus. There he is! Get him! The chase is on. You're running through the back alleys of your own life. You know every twist and turn, every stinking midden heap and every rickety fence. But this knowledge is of little use when you're blind with panic. Your lungs are on fire, every breath is a ragged gasp. The loaf of bread feels impossibly heavy, an anchor pulling you down. But dropping it feels like an admission of guilt, a surrender. You burst out of the warren of huts and into the open fields that surround the village. The moonlight is brighter here, but it offers you no comfort. It just makes you a clearer target. You're exposed, a single, desperate figure running across a vast, empty stage. The shouts are closer now, individual voices cutting through the din. They know who you are. They are calling your name. It's the most terrifying sound you've ever heard. It's not an anonymous mob anymore. It's your community, and they are coming to swallow you whole. In the distance, one solid shape stands out against the night sky. Its stone walls are ghostly grey in the moonlight. The church. An idea, a desperate last-ditch hope sparks in your mind. Sanctuary. It might be your only chance. As you sprint across the open field, the cold night air burning in your throat, your mind is racing faster than your legs. The shouts behind you are a physical force, pushing you onward. Your whole world has shrunk to this single desperate flight, and as you run, another layer of the legal system you've just violated clicks into place, one that explains the grim determination on the faces of the men chasing you. It's not just the collective fine the village might face, it's something far more personal and ingrained in the fabric of your community. The tithing system. You're part of a tithing. Since you were a boy, you've been bound together with a small group of other men from the village, usually around 10 or 12 households. This group, your tithing, is a unit of collective security, a sort of mandatory social club where the main activity is making. Sure, nobody steps out of line. It's a system that dates back to Anglo-Saxon times, a simple and brutally effective way for a king to police a kingdom without a police force. He simply made everyone police each other. Your neighbours aren't just your neighbours. They are your legal guardians, and in a way, your jailers. The deal is this. Everyone in the tithing is mutually responsible for the good behaviour of everyone else. If one member, like you, commits a crime, the other members are legally obligated to bring you to justice. They have to present you to the court. If you run away and they can't produce you, they all have to pay a fine, an amercement, for failing in their duty. This system, known as Frank Pledge, essentially weaponizes peer pressure. Your reputation, your standing, and your finances are all intertwined with the actions of the 9 or 10 men closest to you. It's like having a dozen overbearing parents-in-law, all of whom have a financial stake in your moral character. You can now picture their faces in the mob, and you understand their fury on a deeper level. There's old Thomas, the head of your tithing, a man whose word carries weight. He's probably shouting the loudest, his face red with a mixture of anger and shame. Your crime is his failure. It reflects on him directly. He will have to stand before the reeve or the circuit judge and explain how one of his men went astray. Then there's young Robert, who just got married and is struggling to make his own way. The fine he'll have to pay because of your stupidity will be a crushing blow to his new family. He isn't just chasing a thief. He's chasing the man who's about to take the food out of his own child's mouth. Your crime has made you an enemy not just of the law, but of your closest allies. This is why there is no hesitation in their pursuit. They are not simply helping the baker. They are trying to catch you to save their own skins. Historians have pored over tithing lists and court rolls for centuries, and they still debate the system's true effectiveness. Did it actually prevent crime through this intense social pressure, or did it just create a complex web of local resentments and grudges? When a crime was committed, did the tithing genuinely try to find the culprit? Or was there a conspiracy of silence to protect one of their own from the law and save themselves the fine? It likely varied from village to village. A tight-knit, stable community might work together seamlessly. A village rife with feuds and factions might see the system break down into accusations and finger-pointing. A quirky fringe detail of this system is that not everyone had to be in a tithing. The highest and lowest rungs of society were exempt. The local lord, his knights, and their immediate families were not part of it. Their personal honour was considered sufficient guarantee of their good behaviour, a convenient rule when you're the one making them. Likewise, the clergy were outside the system, accountable to the church, and at the other end, vagrants and travellers, those with no fixed abode, were also exempt because they had no community to be bound to. Frank Pledge was a system for the settled, land-working backbone of the kingdom, people exactly like you. As you run, the weight of this betrayal, this severing of social bonds, is almost as heavy as the loaf of bread you still inexplicably clutch. You've broken the king's peace, you've sinned against God, and you've betrayed the trust of your tithing brothers. You've smashed the delicate social machinery that holds your world together. The shouts behind you are not just a hue and cry for a thief. They are the sound of a community trying to purge itself of a liability. They are casting you out. Your lungs feel as if they're about to burst. The church is closer now, its dark, solid mass a promise of something other than the muddy field and the angry mob. It represents a different kind of law, a different authority. You are running from the law of the king, the law of the manor, and the law of the tithing. You're running towards the law of God. You don't know if it will be any kinder, but it's the only option you have left. The first stone of the churchyard wall is just ahead. You scramble over it, tearing your tunic and scraping your hands, landing in a heap on the consecrated ground. You're in. You're on God's land now. But you're not safe yet. Not until you reach the door. You're sprawled on the damp grass of the churchyard, the breath sobbing in your chest. The hallowed ground beneath you feels no different from the profane ground of the open field, yet it is a world away. The mob, your neighbours and your tithing brothers, pulls up short at the low stone wall. They wouldn't dare cross it. To commit violence on consecrated ground would be a profound act of sacrilege, a crime far worse than the one you've committed. It would be a one-way ticket to excommunication. So they stop, their torchlight painting their faces in demonic shades of orange and black. They are a wall of righteous fury, held at bay by an invisible fence of faith and fear. Their shouts change in tone. The triumphant calls of the chase die down, replaced by frustrated, angry snarls. They are taunting you, cursing your name, holding up the tools they were about to use on you. It's the medieval equivalent of a standoff, with you on one side of a divine property line and a very angry posse on the other. For a moment, a dizzying, dangerous sense of relief washes over you. You've made it. You're safe. But then you see the Reeve pushing his way to the front of the crowd. He's the Lord's man, the enforcer of secular law, and he looks singularly unimpressed by your tactical retreat onto Holy Land. He doesn't step over the wall, but his voice cuts through the night air, cold and sharp. "This is not over," he yells, pointing a thick finger at you. "The church cannot hold you forever." He's right. Being in the churchyard isn't enough. It's a temporary reprieve, a pause in the action. The true, legally binding protection of sanctuary requires a more formal act. You have to reach the church itself. You must touch the building, lay your hand upon the door, the stone, or, ideally, the heavy iron knocker made for this very purpose. That is the moment the king's law officially stops and God's law begins. You have to get to the door. You push yourself up, your legs trembling with exhaustion. The loaf of bread, your reason for being here, has fallen from your grasp and lies forgotten in the grass. All that matters now is the 20 yards of open ground between you and the heavy oak door of the church. It might as well be 100 miles. The mob sees your intention. A new wave of shouting erupts. They can't touch you, but they can watch. Their eyes are a physical weight, pressing down on you. You stumble forward, a grotesque parody of a devout parishioner going to prayer, one foot in front of the other. The church looms larger, a mountain of dark stone. In the centre of the massive door is a ring of iron, a sanctuary knocker. Many great churches and cathedrals have them. It's often a fearsome thing, a heavy bronze or iron ring held in the mouth of a monstrous beast, a lion or a demon. The one at Durham Cathedral, for example, is a famous and terrifying lion's head. This tradition served a dual purpose. It was a clear, unmistakable target for a desperate fugitive running in the dark, and it symbolised that you were passing into the jaws of the Holy Church, to be devoured and protected by its power. It's God's doorbell, and pressing it is a matter of life and death. You are almost there. 5 more steps. The faces of the mob are a blur. Their voices a meaningless roar. 3 steps. You can see the grain of the wood on the door, the flakes of rust on the iron hinges. You reach out your hand, arm trembling from the effort. Your fingers, caked with mud and scraped raw, stretch towards the cold, hard promise of the iron ring. And then you touch it. The moment your skin makes contact with the metal, a profound and immediate silence falls over the crowd. The shouting stops. The taunts die in their throats. It is as if a switch has been thrown. By this simple act, you have invoked one of the most powerful and ancient rights in the kingdom. You have formally claimed sanctuary. The reeve can no longer arrest you. The posse can no longer harm you. You're now under the protection of the church. It's the ultimate safe zone, the original King's X from a childhood game of tag, but the stakes are infinitely higher. A small door set within the larger one opens, and a figure holding a lantern appears. It is the parish priest, a thin man with a perpetually worried expression, roused from his sleep by the commotion. He looks at you, a wretched, mud-stained creature clinging to his church door. And then at the silent, sullen crowd gathered at the edge of his churchyard, he sighs, a deep, weary sound. This is not the first time he's had to deal with this, and it won't be the last. "Come," he says, his voice flat. He helps you to your feet and pulls you inside, closing and barring the heavy door behind you. The sound of the bolt sliding home is the sound of your old life ending. The roar of the mob is instantly muffled, replaced by the vast, echoing silence of the church. The air inside is cold and smells of old stone, beeswax, and the faint, sweet scent of incense. It is the house of God. And for now, it is your prison. Historians are divided on how inviolable sanctuary truly was. In theory, it was absolute. The legal texts are clear. But this was an age of powerful, often violent men. There were recorded instances of sheriffs and angry lords ignoring the right, of dragging men from the very altar. The most famous example, the murder of Archbishop Thomas Becket, showed that not even the holiest of places was entirely safe from the king's wrath. But these were shocking, realm-shattering exceptions. For a common thief like you, in a common parish church, the rule would almost certainly hold. The reeve will not risk the wrath of the bishop and the eternal damnation of his soul for the sake of a stolen loaf of bread. You are safe from the mob, but you have simply traded one kind of prison for another. The heavy oak door thuds shut behind you, and the world shrinks to the confines of these 4 stone walls. The silence is a physical presence, pressing in on you after the chaotic noise of the chase. The air is frigid, colder even than it was outside, and carries the ancient smells of melting wax, damp stone, and something else, a faint, cloying sweetness that you can't quite place. The priest, Father Michael, holds his lantern high. The small flame throws huge dancing shadows that twist the familiar saints in the stained glass windows into grotesque judging figures. This place, which has been a source of comfort and community your whole life, now feels alien and imposing. It is no longer your church, it is your holding cell. You have claimed sanctuary, the priest says, his voice echoing in the vast emptiness of the nave. It's not a question, it's a statement of a grim new reality. You know what this means. You nod, though you only have a vague, fearful understanding of the rules, gleaned from village gossip and cautionary tales. You know you are safe from the mob, but you're not free. You're now a ward of the church, and you must live by its schedule and its laws. The first thing the priest does is lead you to the sacristy, a small room off the side of the altar. He finds a piece of rough cloth and a bowl of water, and makes you wash the mud and blood from your hands and face. It feels like a ritual cleansing, a stripping away of your former self. He gives you a plain, dark robe to wear, the simple habit of a penitent. Your own clothes, torn and filthy, are taken away. It's a physical transformation that mirrors your new legal status. You're no longer a villager. You're now officially a sanctuary man. He explains the rules. You're entitled to the protection of this building for 40 days and 40 nights. During that time, you cannot be removed by secular authorities. You're under God's law, not the king's. You're permitted to stay within the bounds of the church and its attached churchyard. Stepping 1 foot beyond the consecrated ground means you forfeit your protection, and the reeve and his men, who will be watching day and night, can legally seize you. You will be fed, but it will be the barest of sustenance. Bread and water, perhaps the thinnest of ale. Just enough to keep you alive. This is not a hotel. It is a spiritual quarantine. The days that follow fall into a strange, monotonous rhythm, governed by the ringing of the church bells that mark the canonical hours. You wake in the cold darkness to the sound of the bell for matins. You're expected to attend all the services kneeling at the back of the church like a ghost, while your former neighbours file in for mass. They see you. They stare. Some look at you with pity, others with contempt. The baker and his wife are there, their faces hard and unforgiving. You are a living, breathing symbol of the crime that disrupted their lives. You are the skeleton at their feast, a constant, awkward reminder of sin and its consequences. It's a uniquely medieval form of social shaming. You're not in the stocks, but you're on display every single day. One of the quirky, lesser-known aspects of this period is what happened if the church didn't have its own attached kitchen or supplies. The parish was legally obligated to support you. This sometimes led to resentment, with villagers grumbling about having to provide food and water for a criminal who was, for all intents and purposes, living tax-free in their midst. In some larger churches, there were even designated rooms or small cells built specifically to house sanctuary seekers, a sign of how common an occurrence this was. During the day, you have nothing to do but think. The initial terror of the chase has subsided, replaced by a dull, grinding anxiety. You sit on a cold stone bench, the chill seeping into your bones, and you watch the light move across the church floor, tracing the stories in the stained glass windows. You see the story of Adam and Eve cast out of paradise for a single act of disobedience. The parallel is not lost on you. You are trapped in this holy limbo, a state between the life you knew and the terrifying unknown that awaits. The priest is your only point of contact with the outside world. He is not your friend. He is your custodian. He speaks to you of your soul, of confession, of penitence. He is preparing you for the choice that you must make at the end of your 40 days. This period is not just a waiting game, it is a time for negotiation. The reeve will visit standing just outside the church door, and the priest will act as your intermediary. Offers might be made. The baker might be willing to drop the charge of felony if you agree to pay him a ruinous sum of money as compensation. Your tithing brothers might come and try to persuade you to give yourself up and face the court, promising to speak on your behalf in exchange for avoiding their fine. Historians still argue about the true purpose of this 40-day period. Was it a genuine cooling-off period, designed to allow tempers to fade and a more rational, less violent solution to be found? Or was it a form of psychological pressure, a way to break a fugitive's spirit through isolation, boredom, and the constant low-level fear, making them more likely to accept the harsh terms of exile? It was likely both. For the community, it diffused the immediate violent anger of the hue and cry. For you, it is 40 days of slow, grinding despair, trapped in a holy cage while your fate is debated by others. You watch your family from a distance as they work in the fields, small figures who are now part of a world you can no longer touch. The 40 days stretch before you like an eternity, each one a carbon copy of the last, a slow countdown to a choice you are terrified to make. The 40 days trickle by with excruciating slowness. Each sunrise is a fresh reminder of your confinement, each sunset a mark of another day spent in this holy prison. The monotony is broken only by the daily services and the gnawing anxiety about your future. The reeve's offer, relayed through the priest, is simple and brutal. Face the king's court or abjure the realm. The choice is yours, but it's a choice between two terrifying unknowns. Facing the court feels like a death sentence. The evidence is overwhelming. You were caught more or less red-handed, or at least bread-handed. The alternative Abjuration is a sliver of hope, but a hope wrapped in immense hardship. On the 39th day, you make your decision. You will abjure. You cannot face the gallows. The priest nods, his expression unreadable. He's seen this many times before. The next morning, as the sun rises on your 40th day, the ritual begins. You are led to the churchyard gate where the reeve is waiting. He is not alone. With him is the coroner. In your world, the coroner isn't just a person who investigates strange deaths. He is a keeper of the crown's pleas, a royal official responsible for protecting the king's financial interests in the justice system. And your crime, your confession, and your exile are all official royal business. A small crowd has gathered. Your family is there, standing at the back, their faces etched with a grief so profound it's a physical blow. You're about to become dead to them, and they to you. In front of the coroner, you must make your public confession. The priest has coached you on what to say. In a clear voice, you must admit your felony. I confess to God and to the men of this ville that I am a thief, for that on the night of... You recite the details of your crime, the theft of the baker's loaf. The words taste like ash in your mouth. This public declaration is crucial. It formally marks you as a self-confessed felon. You're surrendering any right to a trial. Once the confession is made, the coroner administers the oath of abjuration. You swear on a holy relic, perhaps a splinter of bone from a long-dead saint, that you will forsake the kingdom of England forever. You swear to travel from this spot directly to a specified port city, let's say Dover, a common choice, and to not deviate from the king's highway. You must make this journey barefoot, clad only in the simple penitent's tunic you've been wearing for the past month. You're allowed no money, no possessions, save for a simple wooden cross that the priest now hands to you. This cross is your passport. It marks you as an abjurer, a man on his way out of the kingdom, and it grants you safe passage. As long as you stick to the road, no one can legally harm you. The coroner then pronounces the sentence. Your lands and your goods are now forfeit to the crown. The small plot of land you worked, the hut you lived in, your meagre possessions, your single cooking pot, your wooden spoons, the worn blanket on your bed, are no longer yours. Everything is gone. Your wife and children are now destitute, cast upon the mercy of the village. A quirky and particularly cruel detail of this law was that, while your land went to the king, he was technically supposed to hold it for just a year and a day, after which it would revert to the local lord. It was a complex system of forfeiture that reinforced the power of both crown and nobility. Then, the journey begins. You're turned to face the road, and you take your first step into exile. The reeve and a few men from the village walk with you to the edge of the parish to ensure you are truly on your way. When they turn back, you are utterly alone. The road stretches before you, a muddy, rutted track leading to a horizon you cannot see. The walk to Dover is over 100 miles. You must cover it in a reasonable time, typically around a week or two. Each day you must walk from sunrise to sunset. You cannot stop for more than one night in any single place. You must stay on the main road, the King's Highway. To be found wandering off the path is to be declared an outlaw, forfeiting the protection of your cross. The journey is a living nightmare. The stones and sharp flints on the road cut your bare feet until they are a bloody mess. You are a spectacle. People in the villages you pass through stare at you. They see the penitent's garb, the wooden cross, the bare feet. They know what you are. Some throw curses at you, seeing only a felon. Others, perhaps moved by pity or piety, might offer you a crust of bread or a sip of water. You're entirely dependent on the charity of strangers. At night you sleep in the ditches by the side of the road, shivering in your thin tunic, the cold seeping into your exhausted body. Historians debate how many abjurers actually made it to their assigned port. The journey was so perilous that it's likely many died along the way from starvation, exposure or infection in their wounded feet. Others might have simply vanished, abandoning the official road and taking their chances as anonymous vagrants in a different part of the country, living in constant fear of being discovered. For many, abjuration wasn't a path to a new life in France or Flanders. It was a slow, walking death sentence. As you trudge on, each step a fresh wave of pain, you think about the life you left behind. You have a vague, childish notion of what awaits you at the sea, a ship that will take you somewhere else. But the reality is that you must find a ship's captain willing to take on a penniless, exiled felon as a passenger. You will have to beg for passage or more likely sell yourself into indentured servitude. You have escaped the gallows, but you have been sentenced to a life of perpetual wandering, forever an outsider, a man with no home, no family and no name. You have abjured the realm, and in doing so you have abjured your own life. But let's rewind. Let's imagine a different story, a different you, a you who is slower or perhaps less lucky. In this version of your miserable night, the idea of sanctuary comes too late, or the church is too far away. The baying mob of your neighbours closes the distance. You feel a heavy blow to the back of your legs, and you go down hard into the mud. Before you can even register the pain, they are upon you. Rough hands seize your arms, twisting them behind your back. The pitchforks and scythes that looked so menacing are lowered now. Their purpose was the chase, not the kill. Killing you would be murder, a complication they don't need. They just need to hold you. The adrenaline of the chase drains away, leaving you shivering and limp in their grasp. The baker is there, his face a mask of fury in the torchlight. He snatches the loaf of bread from where it fell beside you, holding it up like a trophy. Felon, he spits. The word hangs in the air, heavy and final. Your neighbours, your tithing brothers, now bind your wrists tightly with a rough rope. The bonds are practical, not cruel, but they bite into your skin. There's a strange intimacy to the moment. These are the same hands you've shaken in greeting, the same men you've stood beside in the fields. Now they are your captors, their faces grim and resolved. They have done their duty. They have caught the criminal. They have saved themselves from the fine. You are dragged back through the village, a spectacle of shame. The doors of the huts are all open now, and faces, women, children, the old, peer out. Their expressions a mixture of fear, pity, and a certain grim satisfaction. Justice, swift and local, has been done. You are taken not to your own hut, but to a small secure shed, perhaps the baker's own storeroom, and locked inside. You're left alone in the pitch darkness with the smell of flour and the scurrying of rats for company. The next day, word is sent to the Reeve of the 100, the larger administrative district that your village belongs to. He in turn sends a rider to the county town, to the man who represents the king's authority in this entire shire, the sheriff. The arrival of the sheriff, or more likely one of his deputies, is a significant event. It marks the moment your crime escalates from a local matter to an official concern of the crown. The sheriff, or shire reeve in the Old Anglo-Saxon, is a powerful figure. He is a knight or a nobleman, appointed by the king to keep the peace, collect taxes and administer justice. To you, a lowly villain, he is a figure of immense and terrifying power, as far above you as the moon. A few days later he arrives. He doesn't come alone. He rides a proper horse, not a farmer's nag, and is flanked by a few armed men, his personal retinue. They are a stark contrast to your village's makeshift posse. Their leather jerkins are well oiled, their swords are real steel, and their faces are hard, professional. They are the closest thing your world has to a police force, and their presence silences the entire village. The sheriff is not here to investigate, he's here to collect. The concept of a medieval police investigation is, for the most part, non-existent. There's no dusting for fingerprints or interviewing witnesses in a sterile room. The investigation was the hue and cry. The evidence is the stolen loaf and the fact that you were caught with it. Your guilt is presumed. The sheriff's job is simply to take custody of the accused felon and deliver them to the next stage of the process. You're hauled out of the shed, blinking in the daylight. The sheriff looks at you, his gaze dismissive. You're not a person to him. You're a piece of paperwork, a body to be transported. He questions the reeve and the baker, getting the bare facts of the case. His clerk, a man who can read and write, a rare and valuable skill, scribbles notes on a piece of parchment. This document, this record of your alleged crime, will follow you. It is your official entry into the grinding machinery of royal justice. One of the more peculiar historical facts about this process is the inventory of chattels. The sheriff or his deputy would make a detailed list of every single thing you owned, right down to your last spoon. Why? Because if you were ultimately convicted of a felony, all your worldly goods, your chattels, would be forfeited to the crown. The king had a direct financial interest in your conviction. This practice created a rather grim incentive. Historians still argue about how much this financial motive influenced the course of justice, but it's hard to imagine it didn't cast a shadow over the proceedings. The king's justice was, in part, a for-profit enterprise. Your family watches from a distance, helpless. Your wife cannot approach. There is nothing she can do that won't make it worse. Any attempt to interfere would be seen as an obstruction of the king's business, a crime in itself. So she just stands there, her face a stone mask of despair. The sheriff's men bind your hands more securely and tie a lead rope around your neck. You are to be walked to the county town, to the place where the king's justice is dispensed, the jail. As you are led away from the village, you don't look back. You can't bear to see the faces of your family or the place you called home. This is a one-way journey. Abjuring the realm was a walk into exile. This is a walk towards judgment. The road is just as hard, the sun just as hot, but there is no cross in your hand, no hope of a ship at the end of it. There is only the rough rope around your neck and the heavy, silent presence of the sheriff's men behind you. You have left your world behind. You are now a prisoner of the Shire, a piece of human property being delivered to a cage. The journey to the county town is a blur of dust, fatigue, and humiliation. You're paraded through strange villages where no one knows your name, only your status as a captured felon, marked by the rope around your neck. After what feels like an eternity of walking, you arrive. The town is a chaotic, bustling place, a different world from your quiet village. It's noisy, crowded, and filthy, the narrow streets choked with people, carts, and animals. They barely give you a second glance. A man being led to jail is just part of the city's daily scenery. Your destination is not a standalone building, but is part of the town's defences, either built into the massive stone gatehouse or nestled within the grim grey walls of the local castle. You're shoved through a small iron-studded door, and the light of the outside world is instantly extinguished, replaced by a suffocating gloom and a smell so foul it makes you gag. It's a complex layered stench. Old sweat, stale ale, human waste, and something else. A sharp, sickly sweet odour you'll come to know as the smell of sickness and despair. This is the county jail, and the first thing you must understand is that this place is not a punishment. That comes later. The jail is simply a holding pen, a human warehouse for those awaiting the king's justice. It's a crucial historical fact. Medieval imprisonment wasn't a sentence in itself, but a terrible, dangerous waiting room. The man who greets you is the jailer. He's not a salaried government employee. He's an entrepreneur. He bought or leased the right to run this jail from the sheriff, and he makes his living not from a wage, but from fees extorted from the wretched souls in his care. He is your landlord, your warden, and your sole provider, and he views you as a potential source of income. He gives you a look that has nothing to do with justice, and everything to do with calculating your net worth. He's already disappointed. Your simple tunic and bare feet tell him you're not a wealthy knight or a merchant who can be milked for a fortune. Another stray for the common pit, he grunts to his turnkey. Before you are thrown in with the general population, there is the matter of your welcome fee. You have to pay for the privilege of being imprisoned. Since you have no money, this debt is simply recorded. Then comes the matter of your irons. Heavy iron fetters are clamped around your ankles, the metal cold and brutally heavy. There is a fee for putting them on. Later, if you're released, there will be a fee for taking them off. If you want lighter chains, or what was grimly called the easement of your irons, that cost extra. It's the worst subscription service you've ever signed up for, and the cancellation policy is brutal. Then, a heavy door groans open, and you're pushed into the main holding area. It's a large, stone-floored cellar, a pit of humanity. The darkness is thick, broken only by a few slivers of light from a high barred window. As your eyes adjust, you see them, the other prisoners. They are pale, ragged shapes in the gloom, a collection of accused murderers, burglars, poachers, and debtors, all jumbled together regardless of their alleged crime. There is no segregation. Men, and sometimes women, are all thrown into this squalid stew. The hierarchy of the outside world is perfectly replicated here. Those with money can pay the jailer for luxuries: a private cell away from the misery of the common room, clean straw for bedding, a candle, edible food and drinkable ale brought in from a local tavern. You see them in the better-lit corners, small groups of men who have managed to create a bubble of relative comfort in this hell. But you have nothing. You're at the bottom of the food chain. You will sleep on the cold, damp stone floor, which is slick with filth and alive with vermin. The concept of an ensuite bathroom is several centuries and a revolution or two away. A single bucket in the corner serves everyone, and it is emptied infrequently if at all. Food is your most immediate problem. The jailer is not obligated to feed you. Survival is your own responsibility. Your only hope is that your family, having heard where you've been taken, can make the long journey and bring you food, or, more usefully, a few pennies to pay the jailer for a ration of stale bread and foul water. Otherwise, you must beg. Twice a day, a small grate in the door might be opened to the street, and prisoners can plead with passers-by for alms. It is a desperate, humiliating lottery. This is where the great scholarly debate about jailers comes into play. Were they all monstrous, predatory capitalists deliberately starving their prisoners to extract every last penny? Or were they men given an impossible, unfunded mandate by the Crown? The state provided the building but no budget for staff, maintenance or food. From this perspective, the fee-based system wasn't pure evil. It was the only pragmatic, if brutal, way to run the institution at all. The truth, as always, is probably a messy combination of both systemic failure and individual cruelty. Days and nights blur into one long, terrifying twilight. The biggest killer in the jail is not violence, but disease. Jail fever, what we now know as typhus, spreads like wildfire in these cramped, unsanitary conditions, carried by the lice that infest every prisoner's body and clothes. You see men sicken and die, their bodies unceremoniously dragged out. You live in constant fear of the fever, of the cough that turns into a fatal rattle. You don't know when your trial will be. The king's judges, the justices in Eyre, only visit the county every few years. You could be in here for months, even years, waiting. The sentence of the court is a distant fear. The immediate terror is surviving until then. The grim reality of the jail solidifies around you. This isn't just a waiting room, it's a microcosm of the world you left behind, but with the niceties stripped away, leaving only the raw, brutal mechanics of survival. Your life shrinks to a series of desperate calculations. How to get through the next hour, the next day. How to avoid the predatory attention of the bigger, stronger prisoners. How to find a single, pitiful scrap of food. Your existence becomes a full-time job with the worst possible working conditions and a 0p salary. The currency of this underground economy is not just coin, but anything of value. A man who manages to have a spare cloak brought in by his family becomes a lord. He can rent it out for a few hours to a shivering newcomer, or trade a night of its warmth for another man's bread ration. The social structure is stark and visible. At the top are the gentlemen prisoners, the knights or wealthy merchants who can afford the jailer's exorbitant fees for a private chamber. You hear them sometimes through the thick stone walls, their laughter, the clink of ale-jacks. They live in a different prison, one of boredom rather than terror. They can pay for bedding, for decent food, for candles to read by. Their wealth creates a shield of civility around them. Below them are the prisoners in the common ward who still have some access to outside funds. Their families are close enough to visit, bringing small parcels of food, a wedge of hard cheese, a small meat pie, a few apples. These men become power brokers in the gloom. They eat, and they decide who else gets to eat. They might share a portion with a friend or a useful ally, or they might use it to buy loyalty, creating a small gang for protection. You watch these transactions with a hollow-eyed envy that gnaws at you almost as much as your hunger. And then there is you. You're at the very bottom, part of the wretched, penniless majority. You're the commons, the lowest of the low. Your survival depends on two things: begging and the whims of others. When the arms grate is opened, you join the chorus of desperate voices, your throat raw from shouting, "Alms! Alms for the poor prisoners of the jail! For the love of God, alms!" It's a cacophony of misery, and sometimes a charitable soul on the street will pass a coin or a piece of bread through the grate. What happens next is a mad scramble. The strongest and quickest get the prize. You're not strong. You're weak with hunger and fear. You rarely get anything. Your other hope is the basket man. This was a quirky but vital institution in some jails. A designated turnkey or a trusted prisoner would be allowed to go into the town with a basket, begging on behalf of the entire prison population. He would cry out, "Pity the poor prisoners," at market stalls and on church steps. The food or money he collected was supposed to be distributed among the destitute prisoners, in theory. In practice, the basket man and the jailer often took a generous cut, leaving only the foulest scraps for the people who needed it most. But even a mouldy crust of bread is a feast when you have nothing. Violence is a constant, low-level threat. Disputes over a stolen crust, A coveted spot on the floor away from the leaking wall, or a simple perceived insult can erupt into brutal sudden fights. There are no guards to break them up. The jailer only intervenes if the noise becomes too much of a nuisance, or if a paying customer is being disturbed. For the most part, the prisoners police themselves with a crude and unforgiving form of justice. The days are marked not by the sun, but by the subtle shifts in the sliver of light from the high window. The nights are a terrifying ordeal. Sleep is nearly impossible. The cold from the stone floor is relentless, seeping into your very marrow. The darkness is absolute and filled with the sounds of misery. Coughing, weeping, the rustle of vermin, the groans of the sick. You huddle with other men for warmth, a miserable pile of humanity, listening for the telltale rattle in your own chest that might signal the onset of jail fever. Historians still debate the mortality rates in these institutions. Records are patchy, but some accounts suggest that in a bad year, up to a quarter of a jail's population could die from disease and malnutrition before ever facing a judge. This led to a grim phenomenon known as a jail delivery, where the judges would arrive simply to find that many of the names on their list were already dead. In a way, the jail itself passed the first and harshest sentence. It was a form of trial by ordeal in its own right, a trial of endurance. You are fading. The hunger is a constant dull pain, and the filth you live in has rubbed your skin raw. You're becoming one of the pale, ragged shapes you first saw when you arrived. Your sense of self is eroding, replaced by a single, animal instinct to survive. You lose track of time. Has it been weeks? Months? You don't know. All you know is the cold, the dark, and the hunger. And then one day, a new energy buzzes through the jail. The turnkeys are more active. The jailer is barking orders. Rumours spread like wildfire. The justices are coming. The heir is arriving. Your long, terrible wait is almost over. Your trial is at hand, and you don't know if that's a cause for hope or for even greater fear. The news of the judge's arrival brings a strange nervous energy to the jail. For you, it's a terrifying moment of truth. You're about to be plucked from this squalid holding pattern and thrust into the formal, intimidating world of royal justice. But the system you're about to face is in a state of flux. It is a world caught between two profoundly different ideas of how to determine guilt and innocence. Depending on when exactly you committed your crime, you might face one of two starkly different procedures. Let's imagine you are living in the earlier part of the 13th century, before the year 1215. In this case, you would not be facing a jury of your peers. You would be facing God. You would be sentenced to a trial by ordeal. The concept of the ordeal is ancient and deeply ingrained in the culture. The logic from a medieval perspective is sound. Human justice is flawed. Men can lie, witnesses can be mistaken, and evidence can be misleading. But God is all-knowing and infallible. Therefore, the most reliable way to determine guilt is to ask God for a direct sign. The ordeal is a physical test, a ritualized appeal to the divine, and the outcome is believed to be a direct judgment from heaven. The priest who explained sanctuary to you would have also explained this. It's not a trial of evidence, it's a trial of faith. You're taken from the jail, your chains struck off, for a fee of course, and led to the church. The ordeal is a religious ceremony presided over by the parish priest, even though the charge against you is a secular one. The church is crowded. The whole community has turned out to watch. This is high drama, a divine spectacle. You're made to fast for 3 days leading up to the ceremony, a process of ritual purification designed to make you a more suitable vessel for God's judgment. On the day of the ordeal, you attend a special mass. The priest blesses the instruments of the trial with holy water, beseeching God to show the truth. Let's say you are sentenced to the ordeal of cold water. This was one of the most common forms, especially for common folk like you. You're led to a nearby river or a large vat of water that has been solemnly blessed. Your hands and feet are bound, a rope is tied around your waist, and you are lowered into the water. The priest intones a prayer. I adjure thee, O water, in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost, that you do not receive this man, if he be guilty of the crime of which he is charged. The logic here is beautifully, terrifyingly counterintuitive to a modern mind. Water is a pure element. Holy water in particular is seen as a symbol of baptism and purity. Therefore, the consecrated water will actively reject something impure, in this case, a guilty sinner. So, if you sink, the water has accepted you. You're pulled out, sometimes half drowned, and declared innocent. God has shown you are pure enough to be embraced by the holy water. If you float, however, the water has rejected you. You are guilty. God has cast you out. It is divine, judgment, clear and simple. It's a classic no-win situation. You sink and you might drown. You float and you're condemned. There's no easy option here. The practice of binding the accused was key. A bound person is less likely to be able to tread water, making sinking more probable. Historians still argue about the nuances of this. Was it rigged? Did the priest and the officials manipulating the rope have some leeway in determining the outcome? Could they pull a person out quickly if they sank, or hold them under just a little longer if they were unpopular? It's impossible to know. But for you, bobbing on the end of that rope, it is a moment of pure abject terror. Your fate is in the hands of God and the man holding the rope. Another possibility is the ordeal of hot iron. This was often reserved for people of slightly higher standing, or for crimes where the evidence was less clear. For this, a piece of iron, usually weighing 1 pound, is heated in a fire until it is glowing red hot. After another round of prayers, you are required to take the fiery iron in your bare hand and carry it for a set distance, usually 9 feet. Your hand is then immediately bound and sealed with the priest's seal. You're sent away for 3 days. On the 3rd day, you are brought back to the church. In front of the assembled crowd, the priest ceremonially unbinds your hand. He then inspects the wound. If the burn is healing cleanly, without festering or infection, it is a sign that God has intervened, miraculously healing his faithful servant. You are innocent. But if the wound is festering, weeping with pus, and inflamed, a near certainty in an age with no understanding of bacteria or antiseptics, it is a sign that God has judged you guilty. Your own corrupt flesh has betrayed you. The quirky thing about these ordeals is that they were not the final sentence. The ordeal only determined guilt or innocence. If you were found guilty, if you floated, or if your hand festered, you were then handed back to the secular authorities, the sheriff and the judges, to receive your punishment. God had acted as the jury. The king's men would now act as the executioner. The ordeals were a powerful tool for social control, relying on a universal belief in divine intervention. But in 1215, a seismic event would change everything. The Pope, at the Fourth Lateran Council, forbade priests from participating in any trial by ordeal. He declared it was wrong to tempt God in this way. Without the priest's blessing and presence, the ordeal lost its legitimacy. It was no longer a divine judgment. It was just a dunking or a burning. Almost overnight, the English legal system had to find a new way to determine guilt, and this crisis would give birth to the ancestor of the modern jury. Let's imagine you are fortunate enough to live after 1215, in a world where the Pope's decree has trickled down to your corner of the kingdom. The ordeal, that terrifying appeal to divine judgment, is no longer an option. This leaves the king's justices in a bit of a bind. They have a jail full of people like you, accused of serious crimes, and no established method for trying them. What replaces the ordeal is initially a messy, improvised system, but it will eventually evolve into something we recognise today, the jury trial. But before we get to that, it's worth noting the other forms of trial that existed alongside the ordeal, reserved for different classes of people. If you were not a lowly villain but a man of noble birth, a knight or a baron, you would never have been subjected to the humiliation of the ordeal by water or iron. A nobleman's honour was considered too precious for such crude tests. Instead, if you were a nobleman accused by another nobleman, you had the right to a completely different and far more dramatic form of trial by combat. This was the ultimate expression of the warrior ethos that underpinned the entire feudal system. It was, quite literally, a duel to the death, with God once again acting as the final referee. The logic was similar to the ordeal. God, it was believed, would not allow the righteous to be defeated. He would grant strength to the arm of the man who was telling the truth, and would desert the perjurer and the false accuser. The two combatants would meet at a designated time and place, often in the castle lists, a specially prepared field. It was a formal, ritualised affair, overseen by the judges and the sheriff. The combatants would swear solemn oaths on holy relics, each calling upon God to witness the truth of their claim. Then, clad in armour and armed with swords, lances or other knightly weapons, they would fight. The fight would continue until one man was either killed, surrendered, or was so badly wounded he could no longer fight, a state known as being craven. The loser was not only defeated physically, but was also judged guilty in the eyes of God and the law. If he survived the combat, he would typically be executed immediately afterwards for his crime and his perjury. It was a brutal, high-stakes system. A quirky and fascinating detail is that trial by combat was not just for criminal accusations. It could also be used to settle disputes over land and property. Two barons arguing over the ownership of a particularly valuable stretch of riverbank could, in theory, settle the matter with a sword fight. Of course, not everyone was a knight. What if you were a commoner who accused a nobleman, or vice versa? You obviously couldn't be expected to fight an armoured knight. In these cases, both parties could hire a champion, a professional fighter who would do battle on their behalf. This turned the trial into a proxy war, with the outcome of the hired fight determining the legal fate of the man who hired him. The profession of a champion was a strange and dangerous one. They were often social outcasts, men who lived by their strength and willingness to risk death for money. Now, let's return to your own trial. In the post-ordeal era, you're not a nobleman, so trial by combat is off the table. And let's imagine that instead of cold water, you were originally fated for the ordeal of fire. This was a slightly different beast from the hot iron. In some versions it involved walking barefoot and blindfolded over a path of red-hot ploughshares. If you completed the walk unburned, you were innocent. The chances of this happening without some form of divine intervention or perhaps some clever trickery with the heating of the metal were, to put it mildly, slim. Historians still argue about the prevalence and specific forms these trials took. The ordeal of the accursed morsel, or corsned, is a fringe but fascinating example. The accused, often a priest, had to eat a small piece of consecrated bread or cheese. If he choked on it, or was unable to swallow it, he was judged guilty. The idea was that a guilty throat would constrict under the pressure of such a holy object. It was a divine gag reflex test, and probably relied more on the power of psychological suggestion than anything else. But all of these methods, the water, the iron, the fire, the combat, are now fading into the past. The Pope's decree from Rome has forced a revolutionary change in English law. The judges can no longer ask God to show them the truth directly. They now have to ask your neighbours. The vacuum left by the abolition of the ordeal will be filled by a group of 12 men from your community, a jury of presentment, who will be asked a simple, terrifying question: guilty or not guilty? The age of the divine Son are the 12 men standing to one side. They are not robed figures of authority. You recognise some of them. They are freemen from your 100, the administrative area your village belongs to. There's a prosperous farmer, a blacksmith, a tanner whose hands are permanently stained from his work. These are not your immediate neighbours from your tithing. That would be a conflict of interest. But they are men from your wider community. They know your village. They may even know you by sight. This is the jury, and they are about to decide your fate. This new system, born out of the crisis of 1215, is still finding its feet. The judges, lacking the divine proof of the ordeal, turn to the next best thing: local knowledge. They put you on your country, meaning they ask a jury of your countrymen to declare the truth of the matter. The judge turns to the jury foreman. What say you of this man, accused of the theft of a loaf of bread from the baker of his village? This is not a modern trial. There are no lawyers arguing for the prosecution and defence. There is no beyond a reasonable doubt. The concept of evidence, as we know it, is in its infancy. The primary evidence against you is the simple fact that you are here. You are accused by a grand jury, another group of local men, and held in jail. This already creates a strong presumption of guilt. The trial itself is a swift, brutal affair. The clerk reads the charge against you. The baker might be called to give a brief statement. Someone from your village might attest that the hue and cry was raised and you were caught. That's it. There is no cross-examination. You're not expected to give a lengthy defence. You might be asked a single question: what say you? To which you are expected to simply plead your guilt or innocence. The jury's job is not to weigh complex legal arguments. Their role is to draw on their collective local knowledge. They are in essence a panel of expert witnesses on the subject of you. When they retire to a corner to deliberate, they are not just considering the facts of the bread theft. They are discussing your reputation. Is he known as an honest man, a hard worker who fell on desperate times? Or is he known to be a drunkard, a brawler, a lazy good-for-nothing? Has he been in trouble before? Is his family respected? Does he pay his debts? Your entire life is now the subject of their debate. It is a trial by character. This is where the line between justice and popularity becomes terrifyingly thin. If you are well liked, from a good family, and have a reputation for piety and hard work, the jury might be inclined to believe you are innocent, or at least that your crime was an aberration born of desperation. They might decide to show mercy, but if you are an outsider, a man with few friends, known for being quarrelsome or impious, they are far more likely to believe you're capable of the crime. Their verdict will be based as much on gossip and reputation as on the facts of the case. A quirky and somewhat brutal feature of this early jury system was the concept of peine forte et dure, strong and hard punishment. What if you refused to be tried by a jury? This wasn't as crazy as it sounds. A conviction for felony meant the forfeiture of all your goods and land to the king, but if you died in prison before being convicted, your property could pass to your family. So, a man who knew he was guilty might refuse to enter a plea, thereby avoiding trial and conviction and preserving his family's inheritance. The law had a solution for this. If you refused to plead, you would be taken to a dungeon, stripped, and have a heavy wooden board placed on your chest. Stones would be added to the board day by day, more and more weight, until you either agreed to plead or were crushed to death. It was a gruesome way to force someone to consent to a trial. Historians are still debating the fundamental nature of this early jury. Were they an instrument of royal power, easily intimidated by the stern judges into producing the verdicts the crown wanted? Or were they a genuine check on that power, a way for the community to exercise its own judgment and sometimes protect its own people from a harsh and unforgiving legal system? The answer is likely both. Sometimes they would convict on the flimsiest of evidence. Other times they would produce what were known as pious perjuries, merciful verdicts that flew in the face of the facts. For example, they might find you guilty of stealing the bread, but declare that the loaf was only worth half a penny, a value low enough to reduce the crime from a capital felony to a minor trespass, saving your neck. They could manipulate the value of stolen goods to manipulate the punishment. The jury files back into the room. A silence falls. You search their faces for a sign, a flicker of pity or condemnation. You can't read them. They are impassive, their expressions guarded. The judge looks at the foreman, a stout man with flour dust still on his tunic. How say you? Is the prisoner guilty of the felony whereof he stands accused, or not guilty? The foreman clears his throat. The whole world seems to stop. Your past, your present, and your future all hang on the next word to leave his lips. Before we hear the jury's verdict on your life-altering felony, let's take a step back. The dramatic scene in the King's Court, with robed judges and the threat of the gallows, was reserved for the most serious crimes. But for every one felon facing a royal justice, there were hundreds of people like you dealing with a much more common, local, and frankly mundane level of the legal system, the manor court. This was the true engine of everyday justice, the place where the small tears in the social fabric of your village were mended. It was less about life and death, and more about keeping the peace, and, crucially, generating a steady stream of income for the lord of the manor. Let's imagine a different version of your life, one where you didn't steal a loaf of bread, but committed a more typical medieval crime. Perhaps you let your ox wander into the lord's hay meadow, where it happily munched on grass that was supposed to be reserved for the lord's own animals. Or maybe you failed to show up for your required boon work, the unpaid labour you owed your lord during the harvest season. These were not felonies. These were trespasses and failures of obligation, and they were the bread and butter of the manor court. The court itself was usually held in the great hall of the lord's manor house, or sometimes even in the village church. It would convene every few weeks, presided over by the lord's steward, a man of considerable local power. All the tenants of the manor, including you, were required to attend. It was part court, part administrative meeting, and part community gathering. The proceedings were conducted in a mixture of Norman French, the language of the elite, and Latin, the language of the record keepers, but the accusations and defences would have been argued in your own plain English. The jury here was different too. It was a homage, a jury of your fellow villains, your direct neighbours. They knew everything about everyone. When a case was brought, they were the ones who would determine the facts. The reeve, acting as a sort of prosecutor, might present the charge. We present that on the Tuesday after Michaelmas, this man's pigs broke through a weak fence and rooted up the barley in his neighbour's field. The jury of your peers would then be asked, is this true? They didn't need a lengthy investigation. They lived there. They saw the pigs. They heard the argument. They would deliver their verdict, and the steward would pronounce the penalty. The penalties were almost always financial. There was no jail time for letting your pigs run wild. Instead, you would be immersed, which means you would be ordered to pay a fine to the Lord. The size of the fine depended on the severity of the offence. A stray pig might cost you a penny. Repeatedly failing to maintain your portion of the common fence might cost you sixpence. These fines, all meticulously recorded in the manor court rolls, which are now a goldmine for historians, added up to a significant source of revenue for the Lord. Justice was profitable. One of the most common offences you'd see in these courts was for brewing bad ale. The alewife, the woman who brewed for the village, was a vital community figure, but her product was subject to quality control. The manor would appoint official ale tasters, or ale conners, whose job it was to sample the latest batch. If they found the ale to be weak, sour, or sold in a measure that was short, they would present the alewife at the next court. She'd be fined, and the bad batch might even be ceremonially poured into the street. It was a system that protected consumers, but also ensured the Lord got a cut of the local beverage industry. A more quirky and revealing crime that often came before the manor court was raising the hue and cry unjustly. Remember that you were legally obligated to shout for help if you saw a crime. Well, if you raised the alarm without good reason, perhaps out of a petty grudge against a neighbour, you could be fined for causing a public disturbance. The system demanded participation, but it punished frivolous use. It shows a legal system trying to balance community responsibility with individual accountability. Historians who study these court rolls often debate their tone. On one hand, they paint a picture of a society that was highly litigious and argumentative, where neighbours were constantly suing each other over the smallest of infractions. The rolls are filled with disputes over stray animals, boundary lines, unpaid debts of a few pence, and slanderous insults. But on the other hand, the courts also functioned as a form of mediation. They provided a formal public venue to air grievances and resolve disputes that might otherwise fester and erupt into violence. The goal was often less about punishment and more about restoring social harmony, and of course collecting the fines. So, while one version of you is standing terrified before a royal judge, this other version of you is shuffling his feet in the manor hall waiting for his turn. You're accused of ploughing too far into the common land, encroaching by about 2 feet on a strip that belonged to your neighbour. The jury, men you have known your whole life, confers for a moment. They all agree you did it. The steward fixes you with a stern gaze. You're in the Lord's mercy, he declares. You are immersed 3 pence. You sigh in relief. 3 pence is a lot. It's a day's wages, but it's not the gallows. You will pay the fine, grumble about it for a week, and be more careful with your ploughing next time. This was the rhythm of justice for most people, a constant low level, negotiation of rules and fines that kept the complex machinery of the village running, one stray pig at a time. Let's snap back to the high-stakes drama in the King's Court. The jury foreman has taken his breath, and your life hangs in the balance. But what if there was a way to sidestep the verdict entirely? A legal loophole, a clever trick that could snatch you from the jaws of secular justice just when they were about to close. For a certain class of criminal there was. It was called benefit of clergy, and it was one of the most fascinating and contentious features of the medieval legal landscape. This privilege stemmed from the long-standing power struggle between the church and the crown. For centuries, they had battled over who had ultimate authority. A key victory for the church was establishing the principle that they had the right to try any ordained clergyman in their own ecclesiastical courts, under their own, more lenient, canon law. Church courts could not sentence a man to death. Their punishments were focused on penance, fines, or degradation, being stripped of clerical status. So, for a priest who committed a crime, getting tried by the church instead of the king was a life or death matter. But the definition of clergyman, or cleric, became wonderfully, exploitably broad. In the early days it included not just priests and monks, but anyone in a minor church-related role, a deacon, a cantor, a doorkeeper, even a student at a church-run school. As literacy was almost exclusively the domain of the church, the system eventually evolved a simple, if rather absurd, test. If you could read, you were probably a cleric, and so the reading test was born. Imagine this. The jury foreman declares guilty. A gasp ripples through the crowd. The judge prepares to pronounce the death sentence, but at that moment, you, the convicted felon, make a desperate claim. You cry out, "I claim benefit of clergy!" A hush falls over the court. The judge, bound by law, must now test your claim. He cannot simply ask for your ordination papers. The system has become a legal fiction. He must see if you can read. An official, often the bishop's representative, steps forward holding a book, usually a psalter, a book of psalms from the Bible. He opens it to a specific designated passage. This passage became so famous that it was known to all as the neck verse. If you could save your neck by reading it, this was the text that would do it. It was almost always the first verse of Psalm 51. Miserere mei, Deus, secundum magnam misericordiam tuum. O God, have mercy upon me, according to thy great mercy. This is the moment of truth. The book is held before you. All you have to do is read the Latin words aloud. The judge and the officials listen intently. If you can stumble through the verse, even with a heavy accent and poor pronunciation, you have proven your clergy. The secular court instantly loses jurisdiction over you. The judge cannot sentence you. You are handed over to the custody of the bishop's men to be taken away and dealt with by the far gentler hands of the church court. You have, quite literally, read your way out of a death sentence. It's like using a cheat code you found on a medieval internet forum, which in this case was probably just a worldly priest tipping you off. Of course, the system was ripe for abuse. A literate highwayman or a well-read burglar could commit crimes knowing that, if caught, they had a powerful get-out-of-jail-free card. Many criminals who were not clerics in any meaningful sense would deliberately memorize the neck verse, practicing it over and over until they could recite it by heart. This led to a countermeasure. The official would sometimes point to a different verse to see if the claimant was truly literate, or had just memorized the key passage. Historians still debate the social impact of this clerical privilege. Was it a source of deep resentment among the illiterate majority, who saw it as one law for the educated and another for the poor? Absolutely. The court records are full of complaints about counterfeit clerics who were escaping justice. On the other hand, some argue it acted as an accidental and much needed mechanism for mercy in an otherwise brutally rigid legal system. It gave judges a way to spare a man they felt was not deserving of death, without officially contradicting a guilty verdict. A judge might quietly suggest that a young first-time offender should try claiming clergy, effectively nudging him towards the loophole. A quirky fringe detail is what happened after you were handed over to the church. You weren't just set free, you faced a new trial in the bishop's court called purgation. Here, you would swear your innocence and be required to produce 12 compurgators, or oath helpers, who would swear that they believed your oath was true. Given that you were a self-proclaimed cleric, finding 12 friendly churchmen to vouch for you was often not that difficult. If you successfully purged yourself, you were often set free after some penance. If you failed, you might be imprisoned in the bishop's own prison for a number of years, a grim but still preferable alternative to the gallows. But for you, our illiterate peasant, this is all just a fascinating courtroom drama you can only watch. You can't read the words on a page any more than you could fly. The neck verse is a locked door, and you don't have the key. So when the foreman says guilty, there is no clever loophole to save you. There is no claim to be made. You are simply a felon, convicted by a jury of your countrymen. The judge turns his cold eyes upon you. The hum of the crowd fades to a dead silence. The time for tricks and trials is over. The time for sentencing has arrived. The word guilty echoes in the cavernous hall, a single syllable that seals your fate. The momentary bustle and murmur of the crowd die away, replaced by a profound and expectant hush. This is the moment they have all been waiting for. The legal process, with its rituals and formalities, is over. Now comes the raw, terrible finality of judgment. The judges, who had been conferring in low tones, now sit upright. The Chief Justice, a man whose face seems to be carved from ancient, unforgiving stone, fixes his eyes on you. He is no longer just a man, he is the voice of the king, the embodiment of a power so vast and absolute it feels like a force of nature. You stand alone, exposed in the centre of the hall. Your hands are bound before you. The jailer's men stand close, their presence a heavy physical certainty. You look for your family in the crowd, but you can't see them. Perhaps they couldn't bear to watch this part. Or perhaps they are lost in the sea of faces, all turned towards you, their expressions a morbid cocktail of pity, fear, and fascination. To them, you are a story, a cautionary tale that will be told over ale tonight and whispered to misbehaving children for years to come. You stole a loaf of bread, and now your life is about to be unravelled in front of the entire county. The judge does not speak to you. He speaks to the court, his voice loud and clear, resonating with an authority that brooks no argument. He begins by reciting the crime, stripping it of any humanity or desperation. It is presented as a cold, hard fact, a felony committed against the king's peace. For that you, a common thief, did by force and arms feloniously steal, take, and carry away one loaf of bread of the value of 1 penny from the property of the baker. The formal legalistic language makes your desperate act of hunger sound like a calculated assault on the very foundations of the kingdom. He might then deliver a short, stern speech. He'll talk of the sanctity of property, the importance of order, and the king's sworn duty to protect his subjects from men like you. He is not just sentencing you, he is reinforcing the social order for everyone present. Your punishment is not just for you, it is a lesson for them. It is a piece of public theatre designed to demonstrate the power and the reach of the law. And then he delivers the sentence. For a felony like grand larceny, which your crime technically is, despite the low value the jury might have assigned it, the sentence is not a range of options. It is fixed. It is absolute. The judge doesn't have a book of sentencing guidelines to consult. He has one single, brutal punishment at his disposal. This court, he intones, his voice dropping slightly, making the crowd lean in to hear, adjudges that you shall be taken from this place to the jail from whence you came, and from thence to a place of execution, there to be hanged by the neck until you are dead. And may God have mercy on your soul. Hang by the neck until you are dead. The words are so simple, so direct, yet they feel unreal. It's as if he's speaking of someone else, some other poor soul. But the jailer's hand on your arm, tightening its grip, makes it real. The collective gasp from the crowd makes it real. The sudden, piercing wail of a woman's voice from the back of the hall, your wife's, makes it devastatingly real. Your knees buckle. The world dissolves into a swirling vortex of noise and fear. The jailer's men hold you up, half dragging you from the hall. You're no longer a person. You're a condemned man, a piece of property belonging to the executioner. As you're pulled away, you catch a glimpse of the jury. Some of them are looking away, unable to meet your eyes. One of them, the farmer, looks at you with an expression of profound pity. They found you guilty of the fact, but perhaps they did not intend this. This is the terrible, inexorable logic of the law. They spoke one word, and the system did the rest. Historians often debate whether the bloody code of the later early modern period, with its hundreds of capital offences, had its roots in this medieval inflexibility. In your time, the list of capital crimes was shorter, but the penalty was just as rigid. For the 7 primary felonies, homicide, robbery, burglary, arson, rape, larceny and treason, death was the standard automatic punishment. There was very little room for judicial discretion. This created the tension we saw earlier, where juries would often resort to pious perjury, deliberately undervaluing stolen goods to avoid triggering the automatic death sentence for a minor theft. A quirky detail is that they would sometimes value a stolen horse at 11 pence, just under the 1 shilling threshold for grand larceny, even though everyone in the room knew the animal was worth 20 times that. It was a way for the community to inject mercy into a merciless system. But your jury did not do that. Or perhaps the baker was too insistent, the evidence too clear. They declared the value of the loaf and the judge had no choice. You are thrown back into the jail, but this time it's different. You're no longer in the common pit with the others awaiting trial. You're taken to a separate cell, a condemned hold. You're now in a new, even more terrible kind of limbo, waiting for death. The waiting is its own form of torture. An execution was not always carried out immediately. It might be scheduled for a market day, to ensure the largest possible crowd. You have days, maybe even a week, to contemplate your end. A priest might visit you, urging you to make a final confession, to cleanse your soul for the journey ahead. Your family may be allowed a final heartbreaking visit. They will not speak of the law or of justice. They will speak of small things, of memories, of the life that has been stolen from you not by a thief in the night, but by a man in a fur-trimmed robe in a crowded and noisy hall. The judge's words, "hanged by the neck until you are dead," still ring in your ears, a dreadful, echoing promise. But not every guilty verdict led directly to the gallows. The law, for all its terrifying rigidity, did have a spectrum of punishments. Had your crime been different, lesser, more social, more embarrassing than felonious, you might have been spared the rope and sentenced to another kind of fate, one designed not to end your life, but to strip you of your dignity. You might have been sentenced to public shaming. Let's imagine for a moment that you weren't the bread thief. Let's say you were the baker, but you were a dishonest baker. You were caught selling loaves of bread that were underweight, using false bottoms in your flour scoops, or mixing cheaper ingredients like sawdust or chalk into your dough to stretch your profits. These were serious offences against the community, a betrayal of trust that angered people on a deep personal level. When you mess with people's food, they take it personally. For this crime, you would face not the king's executioner, but the town's jeering mob. You would be sentenced to the pillory or the stocks. The stocks were the simpler of the two devices. It was a heavy wooden frame with holes for the ankles and sometimes the wrists, set up in the most public place in town, the market square, right next to the church or the main crossroads. You would be forced to sit on a low bench, your legs locked into the frame, completely helpless and exposed. The sentence might be for a few hours or for a full day, from sun-up to sundown. The true punishment of the stocks was not the physical discomfort, though that was considerable. The cramping in your legs, the inability to move or shield yourself, the cold or the heat, all of it was miserable. But the real sentence was the humiliation. You were placed on public display at the busiest time of day. Your friends, your customers, your rivals, your own family, everyone would see you there. You were the day's entertainment. People were not just allowed to mock you, they were encouraged to. It was part of the punishment. They would jeer at you, call you names, and remind you of your crime. "Hey baker, is your bread as hard as this wood?" The laughter and taunts would be relentless, and then came the projectiles. Being in the stocks transformed you into a human target. The crowd was generally allowed to throw things at the person being punished, as long as the projectiles weren't likely to cause serious injury. This meant you would be pelted with all manner of soft, disgusting refuse. Rotten vegetables, mud, animal dung, the stinking entrails of fish from the market stalls. Anything foul and humiliating was fair game. It was a messy, degrading and smelly ordeal. It was a way for the community to physically express its disgust, to symbolically cover you in the filth of your own crime. The pillory was a step up in both severity and humiliation. It was an upright wooden board, also with holes, but these were for your head and hands. You would be forced to stand, your head and wrists locked in the frame, your face presented to the crowd. It was more painful than the stocks, forcing you into a perpetually stooped and uncomfortable position. It also made you more vulnerable. You couldn't see who was throwing what, and you couldn't use your hands to shield your face. A quirky but important legal detail about the pillory was that the punishment could sometimes be tailored to the crime. A man convicted of selling bad wine might be forced to drink a large quantity of it, and have the rest poured over his head while in the pillory. A dishonest tailor might have his shoddy garments hung all around him. In your case as the dishonest baker, they might hang a string of your underweight loaves around your neck, a clear and visible advertisement of your specific sin. Historians debate the true purpose of these public punishments. Were they primarily about deterrence, a stark warning to others who might be tempted to cheat their neighbours? Or were they a form of restorative justice, a ritual of reintegration? The theory was that by enduring your public shame, by absorbing the community's anger, you were purging your offence. After the ordeal was over and you were released, filthy and exhausted, you were, in theory, free to rejoin society. You had paid your debt. In practice, of course, the stigma could last a lifetime, but the goal was to correct your behaviour and restore social harmony, not to permanently cast you out. This was a fate often reserved for crimes of commerce and social nuisances. Butchers who sold tainted meat, merchants who used false weights, forgers, and even perjurers might all find themselves in the pillory. It was a punishment that fit the crime because it attacked the criminal's reputation, the very thing a merchant or tradesman relied on. After a day in the pillory, it would be a long time before anyone trusted your bread again. So, while one version of you is in the condemned cell contemplating oblivion, this other dishonest baker version of you is spending a long, miserable day in the town square, covered in rotten cabbage and the scorn of his neighbours. It is a terrible, painful, and deeply shameful experience. But as the sun sets and the turnkey finally unlocks the wooden frame, you know one thing for certain. You are still alive, and as you stumble home, vowing to bake the honestest, heaviest loaves of bread this town has ever seen, you know you've been given a second chance. A filthy, stinking, humiliating second chance. The gallows loom as your most likely fate, and the stocks represent a path of public shame you did not take. But there was a third path, a middle ground of punishment that lay between social humiliation and outright execution. This was the realm of judicial mutilation, or membrum pro membro, limb for limb. It was a form of justice written not on the court rolls but directly onto the body of the criminal. The punishment was designed to be a permanent living warning to others, a walking advertisement for the consequences of crime. Let's rewind your story once more. Imagine your crime was not the simple theft of a loaf, but something more serious, yet not quite deemed worthy of the rope. Perhaps you were caught poaching on the king's land. Not a great stag, which would mean death, but a number of rabbits. Or maybe you were convicted of forging official documents, a crime that struck at the heart of the administration of the realm. For these kinds of offences, or if you were a repeat offender whose petty crimes were escalating, the judge might decide that a fine was too lenient but death was too severe. He would sentence you to lose a part of yourself. The scene would be brutally public, just like an execution or a day in the pillory. You would be taken from the court to a scaffold erected in the market square. A crowd would gather, drawn by the morbid promise of blood and official violence. You would be forced onto the platform, your hands bound. The executioner, a man who doubled as the town torturer and general enforcer of physical punishment, would be waiting. He wouldn't be a masked figure in black. More likely, he'd be a burly local butcher or blacksmith, someone with strong arms and a stronger stomach, moonlighting for a fee. If your crime was forgery, a crime of the hand, the punishment would fit. Your right hand, the hand that held the pen and committed the crime, would be placed on a wooden block. The executioner would take a heavy sharp axe or a cleaver, and with one or two swift brutal blows he would sever it at the wrist. The pain would be instantaneous and unimaginable, a blinding white-hot agony that would consume your entire world. If you were a known perjurer, someone who had sworn a false oath, the punishment might be for your tongue. The executioner would use a pair of hot pincers to pull your tongue from your mouth and cut a piece of it off. For lesser crimes of speech, like spreading malicious rumours that undermined the Lord's authority, you might be sentenced to lose an ear. If you were a spy or an informant caught in the act, you could be blinded, your eyes gouged out or pierced with a hot poker. Each of these punishments was symbolic. The hand that steals or forges is removed. The ear that listens to sedition is cut off. The eye that spies is destroyed. The logic was simple and visceral, but it was also practical. A one-handed man would find it much harder to commit crimes of manual dexterity. A branded man was marked for life. And branding was another common form of this bodily justice. For crimes that were deemed serious enough to warrant a permanent mark but not mutilation, you might be branded with a hot iron. The brand would be shaped into a letter that signified your crime. A T for thief, Tiburnus in a Latinate form referring to the famous gallows, an F for felon or forger, or a V for vagrant might be seared into your cheek, forehead, or the fleshy part of your thumb. This brand was your criminal record, etched into your skin for all to see. It meant you would be distrusted for the rest of your life. You could never escape your past. Finding work, finding a place to live, even finding a partner would become immensely difficult. You were a marked man. A quirky and lesser-known aspect of this was the so-called benefit of the belly. This was a legal protection afforded exclusively to women. If a woman was sentenced to death or mutilation, she could plead her belly, claiming she was pregnant. If a jury of matrons, a group of experienced local women, examined her and confirmed the pregnancy, her punishment would be postponed until after the child was born. The law held that the innocent fetus could not be punished for the crimes of the mother. This often meant the punishment was delayed so long that it was eventually forgotten or commuted to a lesser sentence. It was one of the very few legal advantages a woman possessed in this patriarchal system. Historians debate how widespread these gruesome punishments were. The court records often simply state the sentence to lose a hand, but they don't describe the aftermath. How many people survived these procedures? In an age without anaesthetic, the shock and pain alone could kill, and without any knowledge of sterilisation or antibiotics, the risk of infection was astronomical. A severed wrist or a gouged eye socket was an open invitation to gangrene and a slow, agonising death. It's highly probable that a sentence of mutilation was often a de facto death sentence, just one that was slower and more painful than the gallows. You are lucky, in a strange way. Your simple crime of theft, your one desperate act, was clean. It put you on a direct path to the gallows. You have been spared this middle ground of living death. You will not have to walk the earth as a maimed and marked man, a permanent outcast, your body a testament to your past sins. Your punishment will be swift and in its own terrible way final. You will not be a walking warning, you will just be a memory. We have followed your journey as a man through the brutal labyrinth of medieval justice. But what if you had been born a woman? Your experience of crime and punishment would have been profoundly different. The law, created and enforced by men, viewed women through a specific and often contradictory lens. You were seen as both more prone to certain types of sin, particularly those of the tongue and of morality, and at the same time, as less responsible for your actions, often legally subsumed under the identity of your husband or father. This meant that while you were shielded from some punishments, you were subjected to others that were uniquely designed for your gender. Let's reimagine the scene. You are not a starving villain stealing bread. You are a woman in the village, perhaps the baker's wife, and you have a sharp tongue. You are known for your loud and public arguments, for scolding your husband in the street, for spreading malicious gossip about your neighbours. In the eyes of the male-dominated village hierarchy, you are a disturber of the peace. Your crime is not felony, but disorder. For this, you would not face the gallows or the stocks, but a punishment crafted specifically for unruly women, the scold's bridle or the cucking's stool. The scold's bridle, also known as the brank, was a terrifying instrument of humiliation and control. It was an iron cage or framework that was fitted over your head. Attached to the front was a metal plate or spike called a bit, which was placed inside your mouth, pressing down on top of your tongue. It made speech impossible. Even a slight movement of your tongue could cause a painful injury. The bridle was designed to silence you, to physically punish the very organ, your tongue, that had committed the crime. Once the bridle was locked onto your head, you would be led on a leash through the village. The reeve or the local beadle would parade you through the streets, a public spectacle of female subjugation. People would come out of their homes to jeer and mock you. The message was unambiguous. This is what happens to women who do not know their place, who speak out, of turn, who challenge the patriarchal order. It was a punishment for being, in their eyes, too loud, too opinionated, too public. It was a tool for enforcing female silence. An even more common punishment for a disorderly woman was the cucking stool, sometimes confusingly called the ducking stool, though they were slightly different devices. The cucking stool was essentially a chair or a stool of infamy in which you were strapped. It would then be placed in front of your own house or in the town square for a set period. It was a form of public shaming, similar to the stocks, where you were exposed to the ridicule and abuse of the community. It was often used for scolds, but also for women who engaged in prostitution, or had children out of wedlock. The ducking stool, which became more popular in slightly later periods but had its roots here, was a more dramatic evolution. The chair was attached to a long wooden pole that acted as a lever, balanced on the edge of a river or the village pond. Once you were securely strapped in, you would be repeatedly lowered, or ducked, into the cold, dirty water. The number of dunks would be specified by the court. This was not only humiliating but also dangerous. The shock of the cold water, the inability to breathe. It was a torturous experience that could easily lead to drowning, either by accident or by the deliberate malice of the men operating the lever. Historians debate the legal status and frequency of these punishments. While they are a famous and lurid part of our image of the medieval past, some scholars argue they were less common than popular culture suggests, perhaps reserved for the most persistent and notorious female offenders. The court rolls of the manor, which we've visited before, are a key source here. They are filled with women being fined for being common scolds, communist objurgatrix, or for brawling. It seems a fine was the more common penalty. These dramatic physical punishments were likely the ultimate sanction when fines and warnings failed to curb the unruly woman's behaviour. A quirky legal concept that affected women was feme covert. Under English common law, when a woman married, her legal identity was essentially merged with her husband's. She became a feme covert, a covered woman. This meant she could not own property in her own name, she could not sign contracts, and she could not sue or be sued. Her husband was legally responsible for her actions. If she committed a minor crime, he could be fined for it. If she committed a more serious crime, it was often presumed that she had acted under his coercion. This could, ironically, offer her some protection. However, this legal covering did not extend to the most serious crimes like treason or murder. For those, a woman stood on her own. So your fate as a medieval woman was a paradox. In some ways, the law treated you as less of a person, a ward of your husband. In other ways, it targeted you with uniquely cruel and misogynistic punishments designed to enforce a specific model of quiet, submissive femininity. Your greatest danger was not in committing a grand felony, but in violating the unwritten social rules of your gender. Stealing bread was a man's crime, a crime of action and provision. Scolding was a woman's crime, a crime of words and social disruption. And for that, you would not get the gallows, but the bridle or the stool, a punishment designed not just to hurt you, but to silence you. Let's return to your original fate. You are a man, you stole the bread, and you have been found guilty of a felony. The judge's sentence of death by hanging echoes in the silence of your condemned cell. The days of waiting are a unique form of torture, a slow-motion fall towards a brutal end. Finally the day arrives. It is likely a market day, a day when the county town is already teeming with people from the surrounding villages. An execution is a public event, a state-sponsored spectacle, and the authorities want the largest possible audience for the lesson they are about to teach. The morning begins with the jailer and the priest entering your cell. The jailer is there for business. He unchains you and binds your hands tightly in front of you. The priest is there for your soul, offering a final prayer, a last chance at confession. His words of comfort about the next life are a stark and terrifying contrast to the grim reality of what is about to happen in this one. You're then led out into the jail courtyard, where a simple two-wheeled cart is waiting. This will be your final chariot. You're made to sit in the cart, often on top of your own coffin, if the authorities are feeling particularly theatrical. This journey from the jail to the gallows is a crucial part of the ritual of execution. It is a slow, final parade through the town. The route is deliberately chosen to pass through the busiest streets. It is your Via Dolorosa, your sorrowful way. The procession is led by the sheriff or his deputy, on horseback and in his finest official attire, carrying his staff of office. Behind him comes your cart, flanked by armed guards to prevent any attempt at rescue. The streets are lined with people. It feels like the entire world has turned out to watch you die. The atmosphere is not one of solemn silence, but of a rowdy, festive public gathering. For the spectators, this is a day out. There are vendors selling pies and ale. Children are perched on their fathers' shoulders for a better view. The crowd will react to you in different ways. Some will be silent and sorrowful, seeing a fellow human in his final moments. Others will be hostile, shouting insults and curses, especially if your crime was particularly heinous. Thief, felon, they might throw things at the cart, not just refuse, but stones. This procession also served a practical purpose. It was a chance for you to see friends and family one last time. It was also traditionally a moment where you could be offered a final drink. Many routes to the gallows passed a specific tavern, where the procession would halt, and the condemned would be offered a strong cup of ale or wine, the great condemner's bowl. It was seen as a final small act of mercy, a way to numb the senses for the ordeal to come. A quirky historical tidbit is that some famously defiant prisoners would refuse the drink, wanting to meet their end with a clear head. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, the procession leaves the crowded town streets and arrives at the place of execution. It is almost always outside the town limits, in a prominent, visible location, often on a hill or at a major crossroads. This is where the gallows stand. It is a simple, grim structure, a permanent fixture in the landscape. It might be a single upright beam with a crossbar, or a larger triangular structure, the infamous triple tree, capable of hanging multiple prisoners at once. The gallows were a landmark, a part of the local geography. People would give directions by them. Turn left at the gallows. You're hauled from the cart and led to the base of the structure. Here, you are given one last chance to speak. This is the gallows speech, a tradition that would become even more elaborate in later centuries. You're expected to confess your sins, to acknowledge the justice of your sentence, and to warn others not to follow your example. It is your final performance. A sincere and penitent speech could win you the sympathy of the crowd. A defiant one could make you a local legend. You might say a few mumbled words, your voice choked with terror asking for forgiveness. Then the executioner takes over. He is not a masked specialist, but likely a local man, perhaps even a pardoned criminal himself, who has taken on this grim role in exchange for his own life or a fee. He places the noose, a rough hemp rope, around your neck. The other end is thrown over the gallows beam. There is no complex trapdoor mechanism, no calculated drop designed to snap your neck instantly. That is a later invention. This is a far cruder and more brutal affair. You're made to climb a short ladder, or perhaps you're simply left standing in the cart. The executioner pulls the slack from the rope. He gives a signal. The ladder is kicked away or the cart is pulled from under you. You fall, but you only fall a few feet. The drop is not enough to break your neck. You do not die quickly. You are left to dangle, strangling slowly, your body convulsing in the air. Death comes from asphyxiation, a process that can take several agonizing minutes. It is a slow, visible, and terrifying death, designed to be a powerful deterrent to the hushed and horrified crowd. This is the justice of the king. It is not meant to be kind, it is meant to be unforgettable. The slow, grim dance of death at the end of the rope was the standard fate for a common felon like you. But for a crime deemed even more heinous, a crime that struck not just at a neighbour or the community, but at the very heart of the kingdom and the king himself, there was a punishment so gruesome, so theatrical in its cruelty, that it was reserved for the worst of the worst. This was the punishment for high treason, and it was a fate that made simple hanging look like a gentle mercy. Let's imagine you were not a bread thief, but a far more ambitious criminal. Perhaps you were a disgruntled knight who joined a plot to overthrow the king, or you were caught counterfeiting the king's coins, an act seen as a direct assault on his authority and the stability of the realm. Or maybe you assassinated one of the king's high officials. These were not just felonies, they were acts of high treason, the ultimate crime in a world built on personal loyalty and a rigid social hierarchy. To betray your king was to betray God's chosen order on earth. For this, you would be sentenced to be hanged, drawn, and quartered. The sentence itself was a detailed, horrifying recipe for destruction, and the judge would pronounce it in all its terrible specificity. It was a multi-act play of retribution designed to obliterate you in the most public and degrading way possible. The ritual would begin much like the journey to the gallows, but with key differences that amplified the shame. You would not be given the relative dignity of a cart. Instead, you would be tied to a hurdle, a simple wooden frame like a section of fence, and dragged by a horse from the jail through the streets to the place of execution. The journey would be agonizing, the stones and filth of the road tearing at your back and body. This was the drawing part of the sentence, though that word would have a second, even more terrible meaning later. When you arrived at the scaffold, the first stage of the execution proper would commence. You would be hanged by the neck, just like a common felon. But, and this is a crucial distinction, you would not be allowed to die. The executioner had the difficult task of hanging you for long enough to cause immense suffering and to bring you to the very brink of death, but then cutting you down while you were still alive. You would crash to the scaffold floor, gasping, choking, your vision swimming, only to find that your ordeal had just begun. While you were still conscious, the most infamous part of the ritual would take place. The executioner would take a knife and in full view of the horrified crowd would disembowel you. He would cut open your abdomen and pull out your entrails. In the ultimate act of symbolic punishment for your treacherous thoughts and feelings, your heart and other organs would be thrown into a fire that had been prepared and lit on the scaffold. The smell of burning flesh would fill the air. It was a visceral demonstration that the very core of your being, the seat of your treasonous soul, was being purged and destroyed. And still, it was not over. After you were finally, mercifully dead from the shock, blood loss and mutilation, the final part of the sentence was carried out, the quartering. Your lifeless body would be beheaded. Then, the executioner, often using an axe, would hack your torso into 4 separate pieces. This was the final brutal negation of your physical identity. You were not just killed, you were systematically dismantled. The purpose of all this was not just to punish you, but to use your body as a powerful political statement. Your severed head was the ultimate prize. It would be parboiled in salt water to preserve it, then impaled on a spike and displayed in the most prominent place imaginable, often on the battlements of the Tower of London or on London Bridge. It served as a stark, rotting warning to all who passed by of the fate of traitors. The 4 quarters of your body were also destined for public display. They would be sent to the 4 corners of the kingdom, to be put up in the gates of major cities like York, Bristol, or Newcastle. Your dismembered body became a gruesome map of the king's power, a message that his justice could reach every part of his realm. There would be no grave for you, no Christian burial. Your remains were scattered, denying you the peace of a final resting place and, in the medieval mindset, possibly jeopardizing your soul's journey in the afterlife. This punishment was reserved almost exclusively for men. Women convicted of high treason were typically spared the horrors of disembowelment and quartering, a small mercy born of public decency. Their sentence was usually to be burned at the stake. Historians debate the precise symbolism of this, but it may have been seen as a more purifying death, or simply one that avoided the public spectacle of a woman's naked and mutilated body. This terrible sentence for high treason, codified in law, remained on the books in England for centuries, a chilling testament to the brutality the state was willing to unleash to protect itself. It was the ultimate expression of the law's power over the human body. While you, the bread thief, faced a simple, if terrifying, extinction, the traitor faced a ritual of complete and utter annihilation, a punishment designed to erase him from the world and make his memory a lesson in terror. But what if you didn't make it to the gallows? What if, in that slow, dreadful procession through the crowded streets, something happened? The cart lurches to a stop, blocked by an overturned merchant's wagon. The guards are distracted, shouting at the driver. The crowd surges forward, curious and chaotic. In that single moment of confusion, a figure pushes through the throng. Is it your brother? Your wife? Her face a mask of desperate courage. A knife flashes, a quick sawing motion at the ropes binding your hands. Suddenly you are free. You don't think. You react. You launch yourself from the cart, a blur of motion, and dive into the labyrinth of the city's narrow, stinking alleyways. The shouts erupt behind you, a wave of alarm and fury. The prisoner, he's escaped. The sheriff's men are professionals, not a clumsy village posse, and the chase is immediate and deadly. You run, fueled by a terror so profound it eclipses the pain in your feet and the fire in your lungs. You are a rat in a maze, and the hounds are at your heels. You overturn a fishmonger's barrel, sending a cascade of stinking silver bodies across the cobbles. You scramble over a low wall, tearing your tunic and plunge into the reeking darkness of a tanner's yard. For hours you hide, you run, you backtrack. By some miracle of luck and adrenaline, you evade them. As dusk falls, you slip out of the city gates, disguised in a stolen cloak, and disappear into the darkening countryside. You have escaped. You have cheated the hangman. You are free. But you have just traded one death sentence for another. Back in the town, the sheriff is incandescent with rage. Your escape is not just an administrative failure, it's an insult to his authority and to the king's justice. A formal process begins. A writ is issued, a declaration that you, having escaped the king's judgment, are now outside of his protection. You are formally declared an outlaw, and in the stark, terrifying language of the law, you are now caput lupinum. You wear the wolf's head. This was not just a colourful metaphor. It was a precise and brutal legal status. To be declared a wolf's head meant that you were stripped of every right you ever possessed. You were no longer considered a human being in the eyes of the law. You were an animal, a predator, a pest to be exterminated. Any man could kill you on sight with no legal consequence. Killing you was not murder. It was a public service, like killing a wolf that was preying on livestock. There might even be a small bounty on your head, a reward for anyone who brought your severed head to the sheriff as proof of the deed. So you run. You cannot go to any town or village. Someone will recognise you, either from the trial or from the wanted posters, crude drawings and descriptions that the sheriff will have circulated. You cannot go to your family. To shelter you is now a crime in itself, and you would be bringing a death sentence to their door. Your only refuge is the wild. You must flee to the deep forests, the moors, the fens, the untamed places on the map that lie beyond the reach of the manor and the sheriff. You must live in the greenwood. The romantic image of the outlaw, the life of Robin Hood and his merry men, is a powerful one. It's a story of freedom, adventure, and righteous rebellion against a corrupt system. But your reality is not a ballad. It's a grim, daily struggle for survival. Your first enemy is hunger. You have no food, no money. You must learn to hunt, to set snares for rabbits and birds. You must learn which roots are edible and which are poison. Poaching, the very crime that could land a man in serious trouble, is now your only means of subsistence. It's the ultimate irony. You must break the law to stay alive, plunging you ever deeper into your criminal status. Your second enemy is the cold. You have only the thin tunic on your back. You must learn to build crude shelters from branches and bracken, to find caves or hollow logs where you can hide from the rain and the biting wind. You're always damp, always shivering. Sickness is a constant threat. A simple fever, a wound that becomes infected. There is no one to care for you. You will die alone, your body undiscovered, food for the very wolves you're now equated with. And your third, most relentless enemy is fear. Every sound in the forest, the snap of a twig, the call of a bird, could be a threat. Is it a deer you could hunt for your next meal? Or is it a bounty hunter creeping through the undergrowth, hoping to claim the price on your wolf's head? You can trust no one. The charcoal burner you stumble upon in a clearing, the wandering friar on a lonely path, are they a source of aid, or are they planning to smash your head with a rock while you sleep? Historians still debate the commonality of this path. While many outlaws were indeed escaped felons like you, the status of outlawry was also the formal punishment for those who, when summoned to court to face an accusation, failed to appear. After being summoned multiple times, if you still didn't show up, you would be declared an outlaw in absentia. So the Greenwood was populated not just by desperate escapees, but also by men who had defied the court from the outset. You might not be alone for long. The forest was a refuge for all kinds of fugitives. You might fall in with a band of other outlaws, a small, desperate brotherhood of wolf's heads. This offers a degree of protection, but it brings its own dangers. These are not the merry men of the stories. They are hard, violent men, often brutalized by their circumstances. A quirky but revealing historical example is the Foleville Gang of the 14th century, a group of outlaws led by a family of disgraced gentry. They weren't robbing from the rich to give to the poor. They were ruthless thugs who ran a protection racket, kidnapped people for ransom, and assassinated their enemies. Your new companions are more likely to be these kinds of men than a group of noble-hearted rebels. You have escaped the rope, but you are now trapped in a different kind of prison, one with no walls but with dangers on every side. You are a ghost, haunting the edges of the society that cast you out. Your name is a curse, your life is forfeit, and your only hope is to survive one more day, one more cold, lonely night as the wolf at the door. Let's return one last time to the gallows. Let's say you did not escape. You were not a traitor, nor were you granted a lesser punishment. You are the simple bread thief, and your execution has been carried out. You have endured the slow, agonizing moments of strangulation, and your body now hangs limp and lifeless at the end of the rope. The crowd, its morbid curiosity satisfied, begins to disperse. The show is over. But your role in the theatre of justice is not quite finished. What happens to your body is the final act, a grim epilogue designed to extend your punishment beyond death itself. In most common cases, the body of an executed felon would be taken down after a period of time and given to the family for a simple burial in unconsecrated ground, often at the crossroads near the gallows. You were denied a proper Christian burial in the churchyard, a significant spiritual punishment in the medieval mind. But your family was at least granted the small mercy of being able to lay your body to rest. But for certain crimes, or if the judge wished to make a particularly powerful and lasting example, your body would be subjected to a final indignity. It would be left hanging, not just for a few hours, but for days, weeks, even months, until it rotted away to bones. And to prevent your family from secretly cutting you down in the night, your corpse might be sentenced to be displayed in a gibbet. A gibbet was an iron cage, custom built to hold a human body. It was a macabre piece of blacksmithing, a lattice of heavy iron straps and rings designed to loosely fit the human form, a cage for the torso, cages for the arms and legs, and one for the head. Your body would be taken down from the gallows, and the local blacksmith, as part of his civic duty, would fit you into this iron exoskeleton. He would hammer the iron straps around your limbs and rivet them shut. You were now permanently sealed within this cage. The gibbet, with your body inside it, would then be hoisted back up onto a tall, sturdy post, often at the very same crossroads as the gallows, or perhaps at a location directly relevant to your crime. If you were a highwayman, your gibbet might be placed at the spot on the road where you committed your robberies. If you were a pirate, you would be gibbeted on the coast at the low tide mark, a warning to all ships that entered the harbour. In your case, a simple thief. Your gibbet would likely loom over the main road into town, a permanent and terrifying welcome sign. And there you would hang. You would become a feature of the landscape, a landmark of terror. The purpose of the gibbet was to be a long-lasting deterrent. An execution was a fleeting event, a memory that would fade. But a body in a gibbet was a constant, unavoidable reminder of the price of crime. Every person who travelled that road, merchants, pilgrims, farmers, children, would look up and see you. The process of your decay would be a slow public spectacle. Birds would come to peck at your flesh. The weather would work on you, the sun baking your skin, the rain washing it away. You would become a skeleton, rattling in your iron cage whenever the wind blew. The creaking of the chains and the clattering of your own bones would be a sound well known to the locals, a grim and constant soundtrack to their lives. It's a profoundly unsettling image, a human wind chime. Historians debate how common this practice, known as gibbeting or hanging in chains, truly was in the medieval period, as it became much more systematically used in the 17th and 18th centuries. However, the legal and symbolic framework for it certainly existed. The idea of post-mortem punishment, of using the corpse as a tool of the state, was well established. Displaying the heads of traitors was a form of gibbeting, and leaving bodies on the gallows to rot was a natural precursor to encasing them in iron for greater longevity. A quirky and gruesome fringe detail of this practice concerns the superstitions that grew up around gibbeted bodies. The corpse of an executed criminal was believed to possess a strange and powerful magic. A chip of bone, a scrap of clothing, or even the moss that grew on the rotting remains was thought to have curative properties. Ailments like toothaches or skin diseases were sometimes treated by touching a piece of a gibbeted corpse. The Hand of Glory, the dried and pickled hand of a hanged man, was a highly sought-after magical artifact for thieves, believed to have the power to put the inhabitants of a house to sleep. So, your rotting body could become a source of both terror and folk magic, a bizarre and ghoulish local resource. As you hang there in your iron cage, you're no longer the man who stole a loaf of bread out of desperation. You have been transformed into a symbol. You're a warning, a piece of state propaganda written in flesh and bone. You have lost your name, your story, your humanity. You are just the body on the gibbet, a source of nightmares for children, and a grim reminder to all who pass by of the long, brutal arm of the law. Your final resting place is not the quiet earth, but the open sky. Your bones a final, silent sermon on the consequences of stepping out of line in a world that demanded order above all else. And so we arrive at the end. Whether you're swinging in an iron cage, your bones a stark lesson against the grey sky, or lying undiscovered in the deep woods, a wolf's head finally at peace, or walking into the sea at Dover, a man with no name and no future, the result is the same. You have been erased. Your story, which began with a simple, desperate pang of hunger in a cold hut, has been consumed by the vast, impersonal machinery of medieval justice. All the paths we walked, the chase, the sanctuary, the jail, the trial, all led here to your removal from the world of the living and the remembered. This entire system, this grand and gruesome public theatre, was built on one fundamental principle: communication. In a world where most people could not read, where there were no newspapers or rolling news channels, the power of the state had to be written in a language everyone could understand. It was written on the body of the criminal. Your suffering was a sermon. Your execution was a front-page story. The stocks, the pillory, the branding iron, the gallows, the executioner's block, these were the printing presses of the king's authority, and your body was the ink and paper. Every ritual was designed to send a clear, unambiguous message. This is the order of things, this is the price of descent, and there is no escaping the king's reach. Historians still argue whether this theatre of terror was truly effective at deterring crime, or if it simply bred a familiarity and callousness towards violence. Did the crowd gathered at the gallows truly go home chastened and determined to live a more lawful life? Or did the festive atmosphere, the pies and the ale, turn the whole affair into just another form of brutal entertainment? It likely did both. For some, your fate was a terrifying lesson. For others, it was a thrilling spectacle, a story to be told and embellished, your final, agonizing moments becoming a piece of local folklore. The line between solemn warning and popular amusement was perilously thin. In a world so defined by judgment and damnation, both earthly and divine, it's no surprise that a whole economy of hope and relief sprang up in the shadows. Alongside the formal legal system, there existed a bustling trade in mercy, run by a fascinating and often dubious cast of characters, the pardoners. These men, sometimes legitimate but often freelance charlatans, travelled from town to town selling papal indulgences and official-looking pardons. A quirky and revealing detail is that they often carried relics, a pig's bone passed off as a saint's finger, a scrap of sailcloth claimed to be from St. Peter's boat, which they claimed could offer spiritual protection. For a few pennies, they offered a desperate population a sliver of hope, a belief that mercy could be bought, that a loophole could be found not just in the king's law, but in God's as well. They were selling a product that everyone craved, a second chance. But for you, there were no more second chances. Your story is a journey through a system of control built on a foundation of interlocking fears. The fear of starvation drove you to your crime. The fear of your neighbours, your tithing, drove them to hunt you. The fear of the king's wrath animated the sheriff and the judges, and the fear of God's final judgment underpinned every ordeal, every oath, every prayer whispered in the condemned cell. It was a world held together by fear, a social contract signed in terror. The wind and the rain that wore away at your bones in the gibbet also wore away at the stones of the castles and the certainty of the age. Slowly, over centuries, the ideas began to change. The ordeal faded, the jury took root, and the belief in a justice system based on evidence rather than divine signs began its long, slow march. The public spectacle of the body gave way to the closed-off world of the prison, the sentence of death replaced by the sentence of confinement. The world you knew, with its raw and visible brutality, eventually dissolved into the pages of the history we've been exploring tonight. Your personal tragedy, your desperate theft, became a single anonymous data point in a long and complicated story of how we learned to police ourselves. And now, as our journey through that harsh and unforgiving landscape comes to its final, quiet end, let the vivid images of the past begin to soften and fade. The grim silhouette of the gallows recedes into a distant mist, and the angry shouts of the mob are carried away on a gentle breeze, becoming nothing more than a faint and distant murmur. The cold stone of the jail dissolves, replaced by the warmth and the softness that surrounds you now, in the safety of your own quiet space. Feel the weight of your own body, comfortable and at peace, a feeling of security that was a luxury few in our story could ever have known. Let go of the fear and the desperation of that other time, and allow your mind to drift back to the present moment, to the gentle hum of the fan, to the steady rhythmic sound of your own quiet breathing. The past is a story, a collection of echoes, but it has no power here. Here, in the stillness of your room, there is only calm. There is only the gentle pull of sleep, an invitation to a world of dreams far kinder than the history we have just left behind. Let your thoughts become light, like clouds drifting across a silent moonlit sky, and allow yourself to float peacefully into a deep and truly restorative rest.